Hello and welcome to my new setup here on the East Coast. Hopefully, now that I've finished setting up the computer again, I haven't made too many boomer mistakes and everyone's hearing me. I would appreciate if there's any audio problems, people can immediately report them to me. So, in the event that I need to restart this stream, it will have minimum amount of impacts. But for anyone who doesn't know, I might have mentioned this a few times. I have been really moving around the country this last month. I've basically started a new life on the East Coast for pretty much unrelated reasons. So if my content creation has been light or my live streaming has been light, that's more or less the reason why. And I'm very much enjoying the East Coast and the East Coast time. I can stream at times that are more reasonable to other people. So if you guys are seeing this background and wondering why I have different furniture, why there's no longer the red curtains here, this is just a new setup, a completely different place. Even the chair I'm sitting in here. So my wife does the furniture shopping, and so she got me like a gamer chair, like an honest to god PewDiePie gamer chair. So yeah, it's so strange. For the longest time, I've always had the cheapo Office Max computer chairs, and now I've got this big cushiony thing behind me. Another thing, apologies before I get started here too. You might notice I have a little bit of a bruise on my nose. I have one of those sort of Owen Wilson long noses that just every time it gets even a little bit pushed out of shape, it immediately bruises up. And I think my son was playing around with something and he bought me. And it doesn't hurt at all, but immediately just developed this huge bruise there. And I basically look like Santa Claus on the stream. So someone's asking me whether I'm a gamer. And the answer to that is, if you mean board games or other nerdy hobbies that involve things that you'd consider games, then the answer is certainly yes. I was never a big fan of role playing games, although the few times I've played them with my wife, she's really loved them, so I might get dragged into that regardless. But it's mainly been high strategy board games that have really been my undoing. I really haven't played AAA video games, aka video games that aren't board game simulations. I really haven't played triple gay video games. I haven't played those since 2013. My last video game that I played was BioShock Infinite, and after that, I was kind of done. I like the game. I really appreciate a lot of elements of it. But I've already made a video on this. I've already talked about it countless times. But for this reason, it was just totally. It was. There's so many reasons why that game was just the perfect game to just sort of end my career playing these big title 3D simulation games. So yeah. That was so strange. So I took my glasses off, and just as my vision blurred and came into focus, so apparently did the camera. Um, okay, great. So I assume that my audio is going well, and you guys can hear me and see me. And this is my first distance stream. I did one last month too, didn't I? I think I did one that I renamed it a distance stream retroactively. So just everyone who is watching in. I don't use super chats. I use entropy. I disabled super chat because I don't want to give money to Google, and I don't. I also don't want to send the message that somehow I'm doing this for monetary gain. So I made a deal with myself that I would essentially funnel all money through entropy, and then once I get my entropy check, I would funnel all of that money, or I would basically I would myself write a check to a charity to be determined, and then just essentially write that off my taxes. Of course, I'd recoup some expenses, so it wouldn't be a one-to-one transfer, and of course, entropy takes a large cut of it too. But I kind of want to send the message in doing this that this project that I'm undertaking, which is not really a project, it's more or less just something I do. Uh, I'm saying the things I say to you because I believe them, because I'm trying to work through these ideas myself. I'm not doing this because I can get super chat revenue or because it represents some kind of amount of income that I rely on. This is, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, in this talk, but this is sort of one of the main problems we're seeing in online spaces right now is that people want to have an honest conversation. They want to talk about things. They want to have discussions. But sort of in between them and any kind of attempted truth or connection, there's this constant layer of social media. Social media is becoming increasingly the way people make money. And even for people who don't make money off social media, how their profile is perceived directly impacts their ability to make money in the real world through ordinary professional means. And because of this, I think it's very hard to have any kind of authentic conversation or take when it comes down to these things. I imagine we'll just do a lot of digressions this time. I did have sort of a talk that I had planned, as I usually do for these things, but I don't like to stick to that so closely. I like for that to take up the first little bit of time, and then for me to go into a more casual conversation with people in the audience. And usually I hear most people prefer the sort of extemporaneous conversations. This is, and I know and I'm digressing a lot before I get started on my topic, but this helps me a while because it breaks in the conversation before I actually try to dip into something that's more or less prepared, at least via notes. But this is something that has been a big struggle with me in terms of content creation in the classic sense. Now, my content creation has dropped off significantly. I used to make a video like every week or every 2 weeks. Now I make a video roughly every month when I'm not moving across the country. And part of this is the fact that I just have less time than I used to. A full-time job plus kid means that it's very difficult to find time, consolidated time to make videos, even with me being more or less off other social media. That's one thing that's just, me getting more into life. What can you do about it? Hopefully these live streams give people some amount of value for subscribing to my content. And I do occasionally make edited videos. The other problem, and a lot of people have criticized me for this, is that the edited videos I do make tend to be kind of response videos. And this sort of alludes to my second problem with making content. I have tons of ideas. Like my whole notebook's just full of ideas for videos. And I have at least 3 videos that I've recorded half of and I haven't finished. The difficulty is that when I started this YouTube channel back in 2016, not only did I have ideas, I also knew who I was talking to. Who was I talking to in 2016? That was easy. I was talking to Sargon of Akkad. My first video was literally addressed to Sargon of Akkad. And moreover, whenever I looked into the I didn't look into the camera because I didn't use my image back then, but whenever I made a video, the image in my mind, the question I asked in my mind was, okay, so Sargon has a lot of people who watch him. And I kind of have an idea of who these people are. So if I were in a room with them and I wanted to tell them something that would meaningfully advance their understanding of the world, what video would I make? So I just make that video, right? But the problem is that increasingly, there's been a fracturing on the right, so it's not so clear who is the audience I really need to talk to. You've got the people like Sargon and the people like Sitchin Adam who firmly understand something is wrong and firmly understand that this will involve a larger critique of the society we live in, specifically elements of modernity, but aren't really willing to take sort of the dark red pills of sort of the neo-reactionary steps where you literally start trying to critique core elements of the Enlightenment. And that's one group of people. But are those the audience I need to actually communicate with? Is that the message I need to send? Because those people are on a trajectory that's leading them towards truth. They are making the correct steps. And it's arguable that nothing I say to them is going to reveal that truth faster than they're uncovering it for themselves. And I know it sounds horribly condescending, right? It sounds like, I think I know better than they do. Not really. It's just more or less I respect them because I recognize my past self in them. And I feel strongly that the questions they're asking have kind of very definitive endpoints. And the definitive endpoint where you don't just double down on fully luxury gay space communism looks something a little bit like neo-reaction with a foot in the door to some kind of religious notion of justice and teleology. I'm not aware of any solutions that look radically different from that. And, or not that, again, not that just don't try to double down on some radical leftist principle that at this point I'm incredibly certain don't work. So I guess, back then that was my audience. Right now, it's not so clear that I really need to talk to those people. Okay, but what about talking to leftists? What about talking to people who are currently consider themselves socialists or something like that? Well, are those people really the people that I need to be talking to? Will they even listen to me? I was writing the most developed video idea that I'll probably release next was an open letter to an earnest progressive, or I should say a letter to an earnest progressive, because all of my Substack essays are written as if they were letters, right? That's what I call them. Um, I get like 75% through this letter, and then I have the misfortune of talking to a progressive on Discord, and they're completely closed to any new ideas. They're in the sort of who's the biggest racist type thinking, my opponent drinks water, Hitler drank water kind of argumentation. I won't say that it's bad faith because I certainly don't think it's intentional, but these leftists are a product of an educational system where they've been taught to deconstruct problems like this. And so whenever you get them into a conversation and you tread on something that sounds like a wrong think, their leftist crime stop kicks in immediately and they stop listening. And I don't really know if it's worth my time to try to create a video essay that tries to steer around leftist crime stop. And the issue is then that I'm essentially writing an open letter to earnest progressives for what? For like the 3 earnest progressives out there who might read it. And it's sort of strange. And I know it's an exercise that's useful to do because we all have friends and we all have family. And it's useful to try to imagine in your mind who your interlocutor is or who the person you're trying to convince is, even if they're not listening to you. It's good to have a theory of mind for your enemy. But it's incredibly demotivating to write these kind of materials. So I find a big problem, a big issue with my approach to making videos has not so much been a lack of ideas, but a difficulty in figuring out how I pitch those ideas. I'm incapable of writing without understanding an audience. And that's it might be a personal flaw in myself, but I genuinely don't think that good writing can be produced without without flaws in an argument. I just realized that I referenced the Hitler drank water fallacy, and then I proceeded to drink some water, proving definitively in the minds of most progressives that because I drank water and because Hitler drank water, I must be Hitler. Okay, I'm reading the chat right now. It's good to see that there aren't any claims that I'm being a boomer. So that means you guys are, in fact, hearing me loud and clear. So I can start launching into my typical spiel that I had prepared, which I should say it's not really prepared. It's just basically things I've been thinking about, but it's more or less prepared in that I've been mulling it over, and it relates to the title of this talk, this distance presentation that I'm doing. The distance presentation that I'm doing is called The Fall. So, and again, I was going to do this, actually, I was going to have this distance on actually the 11th of September, which I think is Thursday of next week, or maybe it's Friday. But it's sometime next week, and the timing didn't really seem to work out very well. I think that it would be much easier to do it over this long weekend. It's just easier for everyone involved. And so really what I wanted to start with is just September 11th. And we are actually, and this is really strange, it's been 20 years since September 11th. And I know this is me being a boomer here, but September 11th happened and I was in high school. And I remember people in the lunchroom, a TV was wheeled in and we were watching it. Now, this was my last year in high school. I was pretty much on my way to college. And again, I'm really dating myself right now. You can basically call me an old person just by the fact that I wasn't in diapers when September 11th happened, or I wasn't in grade school when September 11th happened. But because I was in high school and not in grade school or in diapers or not even born yet, like maybe a few people who are watching this stream are, I kind of remember the immediate aftermath of September 11th. I remember this. So the 90s was a decade that was characterized by a lot of things. And I know that people like Academic Agent talk about this a lot when they talk about the boomer truth regime. But it was really much in the mode of Generation X, which was characterized by a certain kind of apathy and a certain kind of slack-oriented optimism about the future. There was never a concern with Generation X that you would get the job. If you go back to the 90s and watch movies like Reality Bites, or if you listen to bands like Nirvana or Pearl Jam, the worry isn't so much that you're going to be a loser, it's that you're going to sell out, right? You're going to become like your parents. You're not going to become rebellious like you were. You're going to give into the system. Or, you have shows like Daria, which is, Daria is supposedly about a millennial of my age because it's about a high schooler and it came out when I was in high school. I don't remember exactly how the years meshed up, but there was some amount of overlap there. But it's definitely from a Generation X perspective. Daria is the quintessential Generation X individual. She's apathetic, she's in neutral, and she sees her role as basically critiquing an indestructible normalcy that will always be there. Generation X and the very old millennials like myself who found themselves teenagers in the 90s very much internalized the fact that we were at the end of history and this was where the buck stopped. And this didn't necessarily end in a bad place. We weren't in Brave New World. We were entering into a world that had an increasing degree of liberation and freedom. If you watch the cell phone commercials from the 90s, they're just filled with this overwhelming form of optimism. You can go around the world with your cell phone in hand and experience all these different cultures and have horizons that are just unlimited. Unlimited horizons. It's the Faustian man's dream in a lot of ways. Not so much connections, not so much things you can believe in, but, maybe you can believe in that. So, there was that image, right? The image of apathy, but optimism. And September 11th happened, and it's odd because I think a lot of people are looking back on September 11th and saying, oh, well, nothing really changed. Did Millennial Woe say this, or did Sargon say this? Maybe it was the Franklin. But a common sentiment is, well, you know what, guys? The transition between 2000 and 2003, we didn't really notice that big of a difference. People were still more or less set on neoliberalism in 2003, just as they were in 1999 or 2000. And it was really things that came later, like the financial crisis in 2008, or the Great Awakening in 2013, or Donald Trump in 2016, or COVID in 2020. Those will in hindsight be seen as bigger transformations than September 11th was. And I get what they're saying. Certainly in the culture, those things were more noticeable. But again, speaking as an old fogey who has living memories of September 11th, let me tell you what I remember about this event looking at my own high school cohort. So these people who are kind of like Darias in high school, they're kind of apathetic. September 11th happens, and we have this huge shock to our system. We still believe in neoliberalism. We still believe in the end of history. We still believe that September 11th was a tragedy and that this is more or less a hiccup to the end of history. We're going to get back on track somehow. Maybe that path has to go through Ralph Nader. Maybe that path is through George W. Bush. Well, no one liked George W. Bush when I went to school. But, these are highly progressive people. But even after December 11th, the plan is still in place. After the shock wears off, oh well, it's the war in Afghanistan starts very soon after. But that's just another war, right? That's just another conflict. And we saw Desert Storm #1. We know how this ends. The United States will definitely win. They definitely will wipe out the Taliban. And to the extent where we have to pull out and leave a big mess behind, as we did in the first Iraq War, that mess will kind of stay contained to Iraq. We pulled out of Iraq in 1990 after we defeated Saddam Hussein's army. And no one ever really gave a rat's ass about it in the 1990s. I remember one speaker came in and talked to us about how horrible the sanctions were on Iraq and how they were causing starvation in Iraqi children. And of course, that was something that we held against all of those warmongering We didn't call them neocons back then, all those warmongering conservatives who were keeping those sanctions in place. But that wasn't some kind of stain on what America meant or on what the future would hold. That was simply something that the bureaucrats were doing incorrectly. That was something that was the product of the man, the big corporate suit that works behind the record labels and the people who all want you to sell out to corporate America. That was all they're doing. Think kind of Ralph Nader rhetoric. But no, we knew that war in Afghanistan probably wasn't going to have a large impact. People got into it not thinking it would have a large impact. And so we were faced at the end of, maybe at the end of 2001, maybe I'm getting, probably, let's say at the end of 2002 just to be safe. We were faced there with a world that seemed like it hadn't been changed. But the change was subtle. Because before September 11th, everyone kind of had a plan for their own lives, for going their own way and being cool. And by about 2003, everyone in my high school cohort felt like they were deeply invested in some kind of plan to save the world. In the 90s, the idea was that the world would kind of naturally drag towards coalescing on progressive democracy. In 2001, it was obvious that something needed to change. Now, of course, there's a transition here too, from high school to college. Obviously, people get more idealistic in college because they're exposed to all of these horrible activists. Well, I wouldn't have called them horrible at the time, but I'm speaking in hindsight. It's sort of like, in college you get all of these high-level marketing scams that try to convince you that you need to become a salesperson. You need to dedicate your summer to become a salesperson for knives or whatever, and or to get involved in some kind of pyramid scheme. And I don't know, more and more I'm seeing sort of the activist class as being very much participating in a similar pyramid scheme. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just digressing. So what's so amazing is that for our generation, actually, I would maintain September 11th was a great opportunity. Sort of the doors of Valhalla had opened to our generation. We were the people who thought that we were history's middle children. We thought we were the people who history had passed over. But now, apparently, we were going to be the generation that would save the world. And that was the transition. And for a certain amount of people, that was the war in Afghanistan. That was, I should say, I was a very progressive high school. It was a very progressive high school. But there were a few people who, when September 11th happened, they joined the military immediately. This was their calling. They were going to be the ones who fixed the war on terror. I remember observing them because they were always people who were really into history and really into telling stories. A few of them. They were big history buffs. And I was a big history buff, so we always used to talk about things like World War II and who would have won this war or that. And just a few of them went off and joined the military and went to Afghanistan. I remember marking that because I was like, oh my God, really? Is that person, is Joshua really going to join the military? That's his path? Is Frank really going to become a Marine? I can't see that. No one was named Frank. I'm just making these names up. But in the same sense, there were people who took this as their calling. The rest of us, the majority of the people from the blue state, did not take this calling. We found a different calling, but we did find a calling. And I call this calling the call of being the expert or the activist savior. If you were to ask me in 2003 or 2002, would I be some kind of significant person who is making a difference? Of course, all young people would say yes, right? That's probably less material than you might think. But you'd ask me how. I'd say, oh yeah, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to get all of this technical information. I'm going to become an expert in this or that field. And then I'm going to go, and this expertise is going to revolutionize something. We're going to solve global warming. We're going to come up with all these new technical solutions. The internet's going to connect everyone. And just imagine what will happen when everyone's talking to each other for the first time with no restriction on the amount of information that we can exchange. That wasn't even conceivable in 2002. In 2002, people were struggling with America Online Instant Messaging System. In 2002, my parents' generation didn't use the internet at all. It was some strange thing. They checked their email. That was basically it. And the idea was, oh, well, the technology is going to come and this is going to open things up. And then it will be like a cell phone commercial from Verizon in 1999. And we'll all be just jutting around. We will be the world. And then all these technical solutions, all these rationalist principles will come to the fore. And I can be a part of that. That is not really how people regarded things in sort of the Gen X style. In 2002, the people who joined the military to save the world from the Taliban by fighting in Afghanistan, and the people who went off to college to become experts to try to save the world from global warming, I used to think that they were so different. I used to think that those two people were fire and water, fire and ice, complete antitheses to each other. The instinct was the same one, right? It was the same idea. The same idea was that the vision of the old world had been manifestly threatened, and now it was up to our generation to put together the pieces. Right at the 20th anniversary of September 11th, the war that we started 20 years ago, or almost 20 years ago, because I think it started closer to 2002, it's coming to an end in the most humiliating way possible for America. It was really hard to believe watching it. I knew that the evacuation would be messy. I wasn't prepared to see people falling off of plane fuselages to their deaths. It was almost kind of grimly poetic in the sense that the biggest image I have in my mind from September 11th is people getting blown out of buildings and falling to their death from the World Trade Center. And now 20 years later, the image of the ultimate fate of Afghanistan is a person falling out of a plane he's clinging to try to escape getting executed by the Taliban. The people who we ostensibly, I wouldn't say blame for 9/11, but we essentially group them in to the culpability for 9/11. The world of the expert has completely collapsed. I'm not going to rehash what happened in Afghanistan. Everyone has CNN. Everyone knows what's going on, what utter humiliation, what utter incompetence is on display. Everyone knew that we had to get out of Afghanistan, and even a child could plan a better evacuation from Afghanistan than would actually occurred. I told my wife, I've had video game campaigns of total war where I planned evacuations better than the U.S. military planned the evacuation from Afghanistan. And I understand the fog of war and all that. Robert McNamara's movie of the same name is one of my favorite documentaries ever made. This is beyond anything that I can attribute to the fog of war or the difficulty of experts. This is something that any type of military leader from the past will be utterly ashamed of. And the Taliban are right to parade this as an utter defeat of their long-standing enemy for the last 20 years. And in no way are any of the usual suspects present to take blame for this. And that's what's so funny. A lot of my high school friends who came back after their tour of duty, I met up with them close to the Great Awakening. I remember even back in 2013, just how disillusioned they were with the whole thing. And I know I'm not saying all military people have this attitude. I understand they come from a blue state. I understand people who joined in the wake of 9/11 probably had very different expectations than other people. But the amount of disillusionment you see coming from ex-military, or at least that I've seen, was really quite amazing. And I remember at the same time hearing people talk about, and this is still during Obama's second term, when there was a research of the Taliban, one of the foreign policy commenters said, well, it's amazing, if the Taliban weren't so incompetent, they would have conquered the country already. They should be able to string together some form of Islamic jurisprudence with Pashtun nationalism, and they could get 90% of the Afghans on board and just waltz right into Kabul. And the American military would even have a hard time repelling them, possibly. And at that point, I knew that the war was pretty much lost, because once you're relying on the incompetence of your enemies to keep yourself in play, that's pretty bad. That means you're going to lose the war. However, back then, back in 2012, when I first knew that we were losing the war, when I heard that, when I was hearing people coming back from tours of duty there, I assumed that the fall of Afghanistan would mean something different. I thought it would essentially discredit the conservative neocon joint chiefs of staff perspective that we can bring democracy to the world. Gee, did Iraq not teach us that lesson? I guess we needed to double whammy on this one. And I thought the people who would ultimately take the blame would be, Team Red, basically. The people who followed Bush and Cheney, and the people who want a new round with David Petraeus and all this counterinsurgency stuff that you constantly hear about as a panacea for everything. That's what I thought it would ultimately mean. But that's not what it means right now, right? And this is another surprising thing. You go out and you feel the air and you hear what people are talking about. And you even potentially turn on CNN or check their front page for a few seconds. And things are palpably different. You can tell something has changed in America. That there's been some kind of deep psychological wound. This is not Iraq. This is not even Vietnam. This is something far deeper. The media is turning on Joe Biden. They're turning on elements of the State Department. And I know I said this in a previous conversation, but I'll repeat it here. Possibly this is due, in part, to the fact that people who worked for the State Department and people who work for what we usually call the cathedral, right, the information spreading institutions around the world, they looked at Afghanistan like Iraq too. Whereas a loss in Iraq would essentially be meaningless. If anything, it increased their power and credibility, because a lot of them were against the idea to begin with, and they were soft power people anyway. But the fall of Afghanistan and the way it occurred absolutely cost them credibility this time. Because you realize that their power, their soft power, relies on one thing, the most important thing for a neo-reactionary in any context, the number one measurement of the goodness or badness of society. Some people say order, but it basically just means, can you keep your promises? How much is a promise worth when it comes to you from the State Department? Well, after Afghanistan, that promise is worth a whole hell of a lot less. And if the promise isn't good in Kabul, is it good in Taipei? Is it good in Poland? Is it good in Warsaw? Is it good in Romania? Is it good in Turkey? Which one of the allies, which one of our buffer states can reliably count on America in a confrontation if it so readily botches what should have been an easy evacuation? A lot of people say that, okay, they'll bring over refugees, and that's another conversation. But in the immediate term, if you're wondering why all of these State Department people, why all of these cathedral people are so bent out of shape out of Afghanistan, they realized in this evacuation that it destroyed their credibility. And this was a manifest demonstration that America did not keep its promises, and that America was a fundamentally weak force that could not be counted on. And that if you wanted some kind of stability, you needed to look to other actors, maybe Russia, maybe China, hell, maybe even Brazil or something else like that. But America was not a reliable partner if you wanted an alliance or if you wanted stability. And even then, okay, maybe that's not it entirely. But I'll tell you what I think died. I think what died is the myth in my generation that we will save the world, either through military endeavors or through our own technical expertise. I know that this is, it's sort of silly, right? I was basically the quintessential new atheist in 2002. I was like, I'm going to do a science. I'm going to study engineering or physics or computer science. And I'm going to come up with some kind of thing that will solve all of our technical problems at a very, very fundamental level. All of the sort of ex-KCD attitudes towards everything. And I slowly learned that this was absolute bullshit. This entire perspective was insane. But how much of our politics either on the moderate side or on the left side, are basically just rehashings of this. It's funny, Morgoth did an excellent video. I'm going to start talking and incorporate a bunch of stuff other people did in this talk. He did an absolutely amazing video. It was one of the best videos I've seen this year. And I know I'll link it. Sometimes I forget to link these things, but just, Morgoth, just search for this video. The video he created was called, I don't know if it was Afghanistan and the Broken Violin or Contrapoints and the Broken Violin. But the idea is that, we have deconstructed things so much that no one really knows what they're doing anymore. We've kind of come to this point in history where the experts we put in charge, aren't really doing it because their entire motivations are deconstructed at a fundamental level. That's kind of the point you have to come to when you believe in this expert-driven consensus. There's another great piece that I read from, who is the author of this Substack? It is, Richard Hananiah. Richard Hanania. He is a great Substacker, one of the classic guys who used to do this. And he also wrote a companion piece that I'll be referencing out throughout this talk called Tetlock and the Taliban. So the Tetlock principle, and this was by a researcher by the name of Peter Tetlock, he realized that for soft sciences, for things like sociology and economics and all of these things, basically expertise is bullshit. You compare predictions made by the State Department staff or by the Joint Chiefs of Staff about what will happen in Afghanistan. They're all experts. And you compare it to an average well-educated person's guess. The average well-educated person's guess, 50% of the time, beats out the experts. It beats out the experts in terms of crime policy working or not working. It beats out the experts in terms of foreign policy, in terms of half of the questions that sociology asks. The expert opinion appears to have virtually no purchase on any kind of correct prediction about what will happen or about what the most effective policy will be in any situation. And it's amazing. This is a great essay, Tetlock and the Taliban. Again, Google it, you'll find it. It's amazing. Richard Hanania, he goes through a bunch of things that we've essentially turned into sciences. How about the crime of science when it comes to crime prevention? Well, since we've started treating crime like a science, it's slammed up since the 1960s. And then we were able to basically reach a crescendo in 1996, in which case we basically threw out the science and we started going towards our gut instincts and just started throwing people in jail. Now, this caused an incarceration problem, which we still haven't figured out. But then sometime around the Great Awakening, the elites decided that, we really should trust the experts again, and we don't want to have mass incarceration. So let's science this baby up and start de-policing our cities. And so, predictably, since that period of time, our crime rate, our murder rate's been going up. And in 2020, it basically slammed up to the point where we're at 1996 levels again. We're at 1996 levels of murder, of absolute dead bodies just being there because somebody shot them. I think 2020, we'll have to look at the exact number, but we're close if we're not there yet to the absolute maximum we've ever experienced. Of course, this is deceptive, right? This is deceptive. We're actually much worse than that because the murder rate has two mitigating factors. The first one is how old your population is, and the second one is how good doctors are at actually patching people up. If you drive by a bunch of people, the doctors in 2020 are going to be way better at making sure people don't die from their wounds than the doctors of 1981. People getting shot up, getting brought into ER wards in 1981, the doctors didn't know what the hell they were doing. They weren't battlefield doctors. Their ability to actually process people who'd been dug into by semi-automatic weapons was actually very limited. And since then, we've had 40 years of medical technology. And so much fewer people die of these violent outbursts. Furthermore, we're a much older population than we were in 1996 or 1981. And so this crime spike indicates that the crime is coming from a much broader range of people, or that a much smaller set of young people are causing a much, much larger proportional amount of murders. Absolutely. There's no way you could look at crime statistics in this country and not see a complete breakdown of the ability of experts to correctly deal with this problem, to effectively deal with this problem. Furthermore, and I'm just picking this out from this Tetlock and the Taliban article because I thought it was so poignant. What about psychology? In the 20th century, we basically made psychology from a religious experience. You know, if you were having psychological problems, you go talk to a priest. You go talk to somebody, you know, maybe a wise friend, or your next door neighbor who probably give you very Jordan Petersonian advice without the cost of a Jordan Peterson lecture. Okay, well, we took psychology and we turned it into a science in the 20th century. Suicide rates have been going up and up and up. They've even been going up among women. And the distance between men and women's suicide rates is actually closed. So an incredibly larger amount of women and men are killing themselves, and particularly women. But, well, I don't know. It depends on how you measure it, because men's goes up more absolutely, whereas the percentage increase is more on women's side. And I don't know which one is more relevant or which is more useful for this. But long story short, insofar as there's any kind of absolutely undeniable measure of our psychological health, it would be bodies from suicide, would it? If people are so psychologically unhealthy that they're literally putting a bullet through their brain, that's an actual measurable failure. And even if you don't like that one, right, the happiness rate's been going down too, in a very similar way since we started doing psychology as a science. What does this have to do with Afghanistan? Well, again, I'm copying this from Hananiah's article. Afghanistan was a scientific war. The president who fled Afghanistan in the wake of a Taliban incursion, basically a week after we left, was a professor of international relations trained at Columbia. He was an expert. He was a PhD. Nobody had more expertise than him. No one had more expertise in strategic withdrawals, in counterinsurgency, than the thousands of experts and military officials and four-star generals, well, probably only a few four-star generals, that we put in charge of Afghanistan's withdrawal. And all that expertise was defeated by a bunch of guys in pickup trucks with AK-47s. That expertise is meaningless. What we see here is the fact that September 11th symbolized something that we weren't really ready to internalize. When our generation saw September 11th, we thought it meant, oh, you have to fix the world. You have to fix the world. You have to use what you've learned in high school, what you've learned as a too cool for school kid, and you have to take that expertise and bring it to the world and use that to mend the divisions so that we can get back to the track that we thought we were on in the year 2000. And, you know, what we were arguing over was which one of those visions was the correct expert vision. Was it the red state crusade for democracy, or was it the blue state, we are the world, I'm going to try a scientific global warming, Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg perspective? What it turns out is both of these are absolute bullshit. What it turns out is the message of 9/11 was, you live in a dying society. All of the security you thought you had built into these institutions of world trade, very ironically considering it was the World Trade Center, or in international politics backed up by a military, all of these things that you thought were so strong are not actually that strong. They can be destroyed by people who are spiritually confident in themselves. They can be destroyed by a people who just have the will to destroy them, and when it comes right down to it, you don't actually believe in them. That's the other thing. Nobody And I don't want to be disparaging because I'm very much in this pattern. But I got this impression, and I don't want to be insulting to soldiers because I deeply respect them, and they sacrifice more than I could ever imagine for their country and for what they believed in. But I couldn't help but notice that a lot of people believed more in their ability to save the world than they believed in the America that was actually attacked in September 11th. When people joined the military, and this is actually, in some ways, it's to their credit, because it's actually a much more altruistic reason. Maybe this is just me being in a blue state, but it didn't feel like Pearl Harbor, where there were a lot of unironic believers in America. From the perspective of the people who I knew who joined the military, they believed that the American military was a tool to heal the world of ignorance and to bring forward the good ideas of which they were representative. They didn't think that the World Trade Center symbolized some kind of idealistic American project, the way the American military did in Pearl Harbor in 1941. As far as they were concerned, the World Trade Center was part of a corrupt world trade system. Everyone kind of knew that was corrupt. The Pentagon itself was a bureaucracy responsible for as many bad things as you could list. The people who I knew who joined the military were under no illusion that the American government was involved in a lot of shady things. There was not some kind of unironic belief in this institution. Instead, I think we had this idea that we would fix the world. But the problem is we didn't need to fix the world. We needed to have a world to live in. We needed to have a world to believe in. In the 90s, Generation X didn't believe in anything. September 11th happens, and so the world they didn't believe in gets attacked. So instead of creating a new world that they could believe in, they went off to fix the rest of the globe in the name of the systems that they originally didn't believe in. Not so much because there was something here that they wanted to export, but because they felt by changing the world, they would become better, that we would somehow have meaning. The problem is we didn't really have anything to believe in here. By the late 90s, the world that people loved in America was falling apart. You already saw the kind of disintegration of small American towns and the disintegration of the working class brought about by world trade that was well and truly underway in the 90s. That the whole phenomenon where the American dream kind of disintegrates and we become a staging area for global techno capital, where people stop having jobs that are worth something and start having real estate that's worth something. That had already happened. That was beyond debate. And no one believed in that in America. But we were exporting it. Narcissistic delusions are not a replacement for belief. That's the conclusion. So we lose Afghanistan, right? And it's okay. The original reason I brought up Morgoth and his video was he fastened on this thing. He linked it to ContraPoints and Vosh. And what's so strange about this, again, is it's not just the State Department officials and the cathedral people in the mainstream media and academy who are like boomers. It's not just them who are caught off guard by this loss. It's also, strangely enough, the online left too. You notice this? They can't find a narrative box to fit this into. They're somehow distressed by it. They can't admit that they're distressed by it. They can't admit they're distressed by it because it means, essentially, the meaning of the fall in Afghanistan is you have no right to fix a world that you don't understand. You have no right to dictate terms from a position of weakness. Does the left deny that we're weak? Does the left deny that we do no longer believe in our ability to rule or the rightness of our principles? Again, I'm copying this from Morgoth. They absolutely do. And yet they see the consequences of this, the consequences of not believing in your country and not having a country worthy of believing in, possibly, is the fact that people you absolutely despise get to come in and rule over you. That's the natural consequence. The natural consequence for having a country that's not worthy is that people will march in with AK-47s and take over Kabul. The consequence is that people will come into your cities and bomb them. Our generation took the exact wrong lesson from September 11th. The lesson of September 11th was there is deep rot in America that makes its enemies believe in its destruction more than its citizens believe in the fundamental goodness of itself. When people were trying to be patriotic, very briefly, between the end of September 11th and the Iraq War, I remember even in blue states we tried. It was so deeply ironic, nobody believed in it. To quote Morgoth, how can you run this? How can you have some kind of global system to believe in? How can you believe in the world when you don't even believe in your own principles as a nation? And they don't. And so this is sort of weird, and this is sort of where I'm getting at here. And I'm coming to a little bit the end of my notes. This is sort of my second piece here. When I'm walking around in this new place that I've landed, and I'm trying to get the sense of what's going on, I've been trying to do this more and more, log off social media and keep my ears open. It's well and truly correct to say that the music has stopped. The war in Afghanistan has ended, and it's forced us to take a look at ourselves in the mirror. And we're left with a country, and if you're America, or countries if you're European, we're left with a reality that is nowhere. And this is sort of one of my most recent essays on Substack. What is the America that we're fighting for? What is the America that we actually believe in now that we actually live here? If you listen to the mainstream media and to our own government, they're just as soon ready to start fighting a domestic war on terror, to turn the apparatuses they developed to fight the Taliban and Al-Qaeda back on their own Republican citizens that they consider a security threat against them. The country is hollowed out, and nobody in my generation believes that there's any kind of optimistic future in store for us. But yet, even a month ago, we were ready to tell the Afghanis that they couldn't believe in the Taliban, that they had to have something that resembled more the West, even though it's transparently clear that we're hollowed out. This seems unrelated, but only a little bit. In his essay, Morgoth mentions ContraPoints. And really Vosh too. But I guess it could be really any person on the left. It's clear that the left has sort of won the online space. And indeed it has. But I think the question is really, what is this thing called the online space? What ContraPoints has done is created a persona online that a lot of people like, and that only deconstructs. They have all these great identity qualities. They're a woman, they're trans, they're leftist in all the right ways that people like. Yet all of their videos are just, and I'm copying this from Morgoth, all of their videos are deconstructions. And all of their confessions aren't confessions about what they actually believe, or what they actually think, or what they're actually feeling in some kind of genuine way about the world. They're confessions about what they want to have on their social media. Bosch is a great example of this. He's a debater in profile. He has all the opinions that he knows will grow great for a social media profile that will be very, very popular among a lot of people. That's his brand. ContraPoints has, a slightly different brand, but at the same time, it's the same thing. It's this package deal that you put out there, and you try to get people to buy it. One of the best YouTube videos, I think I'm going through a lot of the media I've been really appreciating recently to build this and try to link them together, so bear with me. There's a YouTube channel called Carefree Wandering. Now, these are academic philosophers, and usually I have an enormous amount of contempt for anyone who's an official academic anything. I even have some contempt for academic scientists, even though in some sense I am one, or an engineer, or whatever, who knows. We do math, we publish papers, who... Does it really matter what the name of the journal says? I don't know, maybe. But at any rate, this YouTube channel, however, despite being academic in its origin, is an absolute gem. And they published a video on what they call profilicity. So profilicity is a new concept. I can't remember if the person who made the YouTube channel is the original person who published this idea, but the concept is that in different eras of time, people have different understandings of themselves. So we go from sort of an honor culture, which is a more collective notion of self-worth, to a dignity culture, which is sort of a more individual, moralistic understanding of self, to an authenticity culture, which is sort of an extension of dignity culture, basically. And this is sort of the quintessential Generation X thing, right? That you don't want to sell out, meaning you don't want to lose your authenticity to some kind of corporate apparatus, right? And authenticity, as opposed to dignity, emphasizes morality. Authenticity emphasizes truth. And so in some sense, you could say authenticity is an extension of dignity culture, moved in a different direction. But really, when it comes to the boomers and the Gen Xers, the morality of the person was almost sort of secondary to how truthful it was. Speak your truth is sort of a slogan that makes a lot of sense in the context of the Generation Xers and the boomers, but not so much in the context of millennials. Or I guess it did for the older millennials to a certain degree, but much less for the younger ones. Now, in the era of social media, we've moved to something called profilicity, according to this professor. And profilicity means that your self-worth is not anchored in some kind of authentic truthfulness about yourself. It's anchored in this social media profile that you augment. You build the social media profile and then sell the social media profile, and that is your self-worth. Whatever else you do, whatever else you have in terms of morality, that's nobody's business. What matters is that your online resume, the profile, has the right attributes to it. And this is pitch perfect for something like pronouns. And a good example is non-binary. Like, what exactly does non-binary mean? Non-binary means nothing. I talked to a YouTuber called Demon Mama, who's kind of a Vosh clone. And Demon Mama asked me if I was non-binary. And I simply replied to that YouTuber, oh, well, what does non-binary mean? What qualities would it have to have? And that YouTuber, Demon Mama, replied, well, you just have to believe you're non-binary. So it's a completely self-referential definition. To be a woman is to believe you're a woman. That's the only quality of womanhood. To be non-binary is just to believe that you're non-binary. It's just the quality itself. It's a vacuous definition. It has no referent outside of the word itself. And you're wondering, well, what content could that have? Why do people care so much about pronouns if they have no referent biology? Or designations like gender, even though they don't believe in gender? Or designations like non-binaryism or demisexualism? Why do they care so much about these words when, if you ask them, the words don't mean anything? They have no outside substance. They don't point to anything in the real world, and these people certainly don't believe in the spiritual world. Why do people care so much about them? They care because they go into a social media profile. What you're arguing isn't so much some kind of authentic substance to yourself. It certainly isn't some kind of moral substance to yourself or some kind of spiritual attainment. It's basically search engine optimization. It's that if I have this term on my little profile, that signals to everyone else that they can find me in this community, and I increase my clout in this community. The problem is and I think that we understand what this is going on, right? I don't know if anyone would disagree that this is going on. The professor in Carefree Wanderings video on profilicity makes a great case for this. I won't try to detract from his work. Just search Carefree Wandering and profilicity, you'll find the video. And the example he uses is Oliver Thorne or Abigail Thorne from Philosophy Tube, and that individual's transition from male to female. Do people use that man to woman? Who knows? But if you look at this individual and the transformation they've gone through over the course of their lives, it does not seem authentic in any way that a Generation Xer or a Boomer would understand the term. It certainly is not dignified to use even older standards. It seems affected. It seems like the transition was, I want to be a trans content creator, so I'm going to identify as trans. I want to make videos like ContraPoints, so I'm going to identify as trans. The social media profile would benefit from this change. And the person kind of gets dragged along in tow as an afterthought. Every time I see people in the world these days, I wonder, what is actually going on? People seem to be sort of sleepwalking. The social media and their iPhone are prominent in their minds, and the actual person they are in meat space is secondary. We always thought this was sort of the joke that people like William Gibson were making in the 1990s about how meat space would become secondary to net space. But I think it's actually happened. But that's not just that, right? I mean, and if you're wondering, Morgoth makes a connection to the deconstructive aspect of this process and relates it back to the fact that nobody fighting in Afghanistan believes it anymore. I'll go one step further. When we talk about COVID or Afghanistan. What's one quality that both of these things have in common? Okay, let's see. Well, they're run by experts, right? They're run by people who have the correct hashtags in their resume, social media profile on LinkedIn, right? They're professors, they're 4-star generals, they're colonels, they're foreign policy advisors, they're international relations experts with lots of years of experience. They've got the right profiles, so we've established that. Okay. Oh, they also seem to be making all of the correct decisions, right? All of the decisions, if you were to poll them among experts, would poll very well. Okay, and for both COVID and Afghanistan, what's the real flaw? The real flaw is that there's no big picture. None of the people who ran our response to Afghanistan really cared what would ultimately happen to Afghanistan. The only thing they cared about was, in this particular moment, does it appear like I'm doing the correct thing according to the bureaucratic process, so that I can update, so-and-so is doing the correct thing. So-and-so is doing the science on Afghanistan. So-and-so is being an expert, leading the Allied forces to victory against the Taliban. So-and-so, Dr. Fauci, is making the correct medical decision to confront COVID. But the point is not to be seen in the moment as doing the correct decision. The point is to eventually win the war in Afghanistan, or at least not lose it as humiliatingly as we did. The point is ultimately to get to some kind of status quo at the end of COVID that's at all tolerable and safe. Nate Silver, he was a horrendous shitlip. He was the stats guy who made himself famous for predicting the outcome of the 2012 election. He's a horrendous shitlib, but I saw him this week write about how now that Joe Biden's president, he's completely shocked that the medical establishment seems to have no broader plans for how to deal with COVID. They only react to things that are occurring in the headlines. Something in the headlines occurs, the caseload goes up, and so the process dictates that the responsible people will increase lockdowns. Does increasing lockdowns to case amount actually make any sense? No. Should we be concerned that almost 2 years into a pandemic, our hospitals still are unable to take in surges of patients? Right? This is the country that built a tank army in 1941, trained illiterate farmhands to run these things, and marched all the way across Europe and conquered the entire Pacific Ocean using people who had less than a high school education. and we couldn't build a few stadium full of hospital beds and train up a new generation to change those hospital beds in the same amount of time, we couldn't have built and shipped and redesigned ventilators that would work better. Are we even going to admit where this virus came from? Is that something we can talk about? The thing is that none of these things actually contribute to the profile of the people doing this. All of our experts have no investment in actually solving this problem. They have every investment in their little professional media profiles. To be seen at every individual instance as doing the right thing, while the larger strategic apparatus completely falls in a heap and sinks into the ocean burning. They're basically suffering from the same mental malady that infected my generation after September 11th, and that has been plaguing the West since. The rule by the experts. The rule by the experts who's not actually interested in a solution. This is the question of our age. Because as parent as I am seeing this, experts don't do very much good, or haven't done very much good, when they're applied as stakeholders outside anything but empirical science, controlled science, and hard sciences. From what we've seen from criminal justice reform and psychological reform, they've actually hurt the situation significantly. But okay, fair enough. That's sort of a 1990s talking point. That's sort of a classic NRX talking point from 2008. Experts might not do very much good, but experts plus social media, plus a culture that only knows how to deconstruct things, you've got a recipe that essentially exaggerates and accelerates all processes that are slowly corroding every single thing of worth in our institutions. And every single thing that we can trust going home. Here's a good example. Like, does anyone want a domestic war on terror? Does anyone, do the liberals who in every one of their actions are moving us closer and closer and closer to waging a domestic war on terror, do they actually want to live in a world where we're waging a war against our own citizens, where you see 30 or 40% of the population as a security threat against you? Is that what they want overall? Probably not. But they're not being driven by that. They're being driven by their little desire to be at the forefront of their social media profiles. They're being driven by the desire to be seen as the experts. And all they know right now is that if I don't treat my political opponents as a fundamental security threat, then my profile is going to suffer in the short term. Oh, another great example of this. Speaking of the person who coined the term domestic war on terror, I believe who coined it, Glenn Greenwald, another person who I considered kind of a shit lib, who probably is. He's been doing yeoman's work exposing the decline of, or I should say the transformation of our security apparatus from being something that deals with foreign threats to being something used as an element of domestic policy and of domestic population control. He, of course, was very close friends with Julian Assange and the private formerly known as Bradley Manning, or Chelsea, now who's transitioned to become Chelsea Manning. So for people who don't know, obviously Julian Assange was the person behind WikiLeaks, was a website that divulged state secrets. Now, okay, what's new? Of course, the Pentagon and the state and our military apparatus, they've been bleeding secrets. They've been bleeding secrets into the media since the Pentagon Papers in the late 60s. As a matter of fact, that this has been one of the main weapons that the press has had to use against the military apparatus of this country, is that they could reliably get classified information leaked to them. However, for some reason this time, when Julian Assange did it, or he did it several times, he became an enemy of the state in a way that ordinary media would never be targeted. One of these times, he had cooperation from this person called Bradley Manning, who was I think he was an employee of the Defense Department. I think he was military, but he had some kind of low-level information processing job, and he essentially smuggled out a bunch of state secrets on burned CDs. Okay, fair enough. That happened. That goes to Julian Assange. That goes to Wikimedia. That's a big leak. And back, what was it happened in 2011 or something like that? That was a big deal. The media lost their shit, even though they were doing the exact same thing that the media itself was doing in the Pentagon Papers. Okay, fine. Most of the hip young people understand that if you're against the Pentagon, you need to support Chelsea Manning. And Glenn Greenwald was right up there. And when Chelsea Manning was having their legal problems, Glenn Greenwald donated $10,000 to them to help them with their finances and help them in their defense. And of course, everyone on the left supported this person. Right now, Chelsea Manning, mostly due to pressure from the cathedral and due to the online left, separate things, but they're supported by both of them. So they were able to essentially beat the rap when it came to disclosing state secrets and betraying their position. We could argue over the ethics of that. That's for another day. Julian Assange was caught and is currently in prison. Julian Assange has known to step on a lot of left-wing toes when it comes to his personal politics, and the fact that he was caught up in a Me Too accusation only augmented that. Furthermore, Glenn Greenwald has essentially turned on the left, and the left's turned on him. Okay, fair enough. But hypothetically, it's the same fight, right? If you believe that the state shouldn't have secrets, and this information should have been divulged to the public, you would support Julian Assange, and you would support efforts that people like Greenwald made to either have him pardoned or to get him off the hook, just like they did with Chelsea Manning. I've seen no consistency on this front. Chelsea Manning, who was a darling of the left because they were a left-winger, had a huge pressure campaign to help them out. Now that they're free, their handlers don't give a toss about Julian Assange. Furthermore, because Glenn Greenwald has now taken a turn, I wouldn't say to the right, but towards the anti-left, towards the post-left, people like Chelsea Manning are literally throwing him under the bus. They're denouncing him as a reactionary, saying, "Oh, you're a horrible person who makes deals with neo-Nazis." That's did they accuse him of being a neo-Nazi? Some of your standard, you're racist, you're sexist, you're homophobic. And Glenn Greenwald is puzzling over this. This is a person who, at their lowest, he helped out and bailed out and defended. He had credibility, they didn't, he helped them out. He was good friends with them. He literally visited them apparently in prison, according to Glenn Greenwald. Now, for whatever reason, the second their legal problems pass, and the second that Glenn Greenwald diverges from the left-wing party line, they immediately get thrown under the bus. Their friendship is meaningless. How is that possible? How does that have any kind of authenticity to it? Who are you if, because you differ on someone with politics, a benefactor who literally visited you in jail and helped you when you were being charged with treason and helped get you off the hook for that treason, not only doesn't reciprocate for their collaborator, probably based on reasons of politics, but actively attacks their beneficiaries because their benefactors are inconvenient to their new set of political friends. That's completely unauthentic. That's completely inhuman in so many different ways. But that's the kind of people we've trained. We've trained people so that the second a friend is not amenable to your social media profile, you get rid of that friend. You discard it. It's useless to you. You discard it like old pronouns. Your gender wasn't doing very much for your social media profile. Boom, it can go away. Your commitments to your former colleagues like Julian Assange wasn't doing so much for your social media profile. Boom. Your obligations to help someone who's basically suffering for helping you out in the same crime immediately goes away. Oh, wow. It looks like my longtime friend who helped me out when I was in prison doesn't have politics I like. Well, that's bad for my social media profile. Boom. Right out the window. A person like this is very easy to control. A person like this is very easy to control because their entire personality exists in a mainframe that's owned by Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. The second that profile goes down, they will react and they'll throw their principles under the bus, they'll throw their friends under the bus, they'll throw their identities under the bus to make the line go up again. Maybe the beginning of a new world begins with some kind of realization that we need people who don't do this. The older cultures of honor, of dignity, and even of authenticity wouldn't have allowed for this. I don't know what selling out meant for the grunge crowd or the punk crowd in the 1980s and 90s, but I'd like to think that selling out had something to do with throwing your former colleagues under the bus when they were no longer good for your popularity anymore. As a matter of fact, that sounds exactly like what selling out meant in the 90s. I wasn't really there for the 80s, but that's what selling out meant when we talked about it in the late 90s, at least as much as I knew about it as a younger teenager. And yet, not only is that behavior de-emphasized in the 2020s, it's absolutely encouraged. We want traitors, we want sycophants, we want people who have fan bases but no friends. I don't want a fan base. I want people who actually are friends, who I can shake the hand of, who I can, I don't know, maybe just hang out with. I want people who I can actually trust. I don't want a social media profile. I know I'm talking to you right now through a social media profile, but that's not really the point. I want a world that I can actually live in. I don't want to be seen as someone who's saving the world. And I certainly don't want to save the world if I can't build a microcosm of a world that's worthy in some place that I can control. The struggle we're dealing with right now is how we can build an authentic world. I hope a moral world. I hope a world that has some kind of beauty to it, but something that's not just a page that exists in Mark Zuckerberg's mainframe, or that even exists necessarily in the permanent records our government keep about us, or even in the permanent records our employers keep about us. There used to be an understanding that we existed as independent and autonomous units outside of these systems. Do people still realize that anymore? And I was thinking about this, and this is how I'm going to kind of close. One of the things that I talk a lot about on this channel, and I don't really talk about it, but it seems to come up in passing, is religion. And I was thinking about this at Mass today, and it's funny because I have a young child, so he's a great kid, but he's oftentimes very noisy, and he hates sitting down. And so for the last month, as opposed to actually going to Mass, I've basically been sitting in the vestibule or the courtyard, or literally walking around the church with my son, because he's causing too much of a ruckus. And so I've literally missed the liturgy and the homilies. And this is the first time, because my wife was not feeling well, I got to actually go and sit through an entire Mass. And I listened very closely to the homily. And I've been reading the book of Ecclesiastes. Am I pronouncing that correctly? I think I am. It's funny because Unism did an audiobook of Ecclesiastes at the same time I was reading it. Absolutely fresh. If Ecclesiastes describes a period that seems very similar to our own. It starts, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Does that not literally describe profilicity? If profilicity does not mean vanity of vanities, all is vanity, that seems like a perfect description of what we're dealing with in the online world. And yet that's the theme of a book that's 3,000 years old. Or ostensibly, maybe 2,000, right? Maybe it's much newer, right? But, and again, I encourage you to read the entire thing, because you see that nothing is new under the sun. Literally another quote that comes from the same book, right? Nothing new under the sun comes from Ecclesiastes too. So does to everything there is a season. Okay, just read the book. It'll blow you away. or listen to it on Unism, what have you. I highly encourage that. And that gives sort of context, but that's not really the homily today in Mass was from the New Testament. It was Mark 7:31 to 37. I'm not going to read the passage. You can read it online if you want, or you can just go to church today. You missed the opportunity, I think, because this is the last Mass on the East Coast. Maybe if you're on the West Coast, you can still go. But okay, so what is it? It's kind of a throwaway passage from the New Testament. It's not one of the big ones. It's not one of the ones that gets quoted a lot. But in this passage in Mark, Jesus is in Tyre, and he is healing somebody who's deaf, dumb, and blind. This person can't speak. They can't speak, they can't perceive the world around them, they can't communicate with the rest of humanity. They're detached. They're some kind of insane person. Right? They're experiencing some kind of radical detachment, both from the real world and what it means to be authentically in possession of themselves. Okay, that's sort of, and of course, Jesus comes to them, he heals them, and they're great, and the Jesus tells his disciples and the people who've seen him heal this person, don't tell anyone. Oh, okay, fine. That's like, there's like 5 chapters like that in the New Testament, right? Nothing special, right? This is just a throwaway chapter, not one of the big profound ones, or is it, right? Because when my priest pointed out, and apparently, and I think I remember this from, I read Pope Benedict's the book, Jesus, about 7 years ago, and I don't remember if I remember this or if I think I remember this, but there's one word in this passage. So Jesus looks up to heaven, and when he heals this deaf, dumb, and blind person, he says, aphatha. Again, it's a Semitic word. What's so funny is that the passage is written in Greek, right? All the New Testament is written in Greek. This word is written in Aramaic, which means that the author, for whatever reason, thought that this word was so important that he left it in its original translation. He felt that this was, if he translated it to Greek, and if he translated it to Greek, it would be something like "be opened." He would have destroyed its definition. He would have destroyed its meaningfulness. Because if you just read "be opened," what you're thinking is, okay, the guy has closed ears, and now he opens the ears, right? He's telling the ears to be open. He's telling the eyes to be open. Well, Pope Benedict, and thank God for my priest today for pointing this out, he says, well, actually, if you go back to the ancient Aramaic, he's really telling the person not to have open ears, but to sort of be open, as in be present, be holy. Be present might be a good example in our own New Age lingo, because it kind of combines the two in a sort of a Buddhist sense. Sort of be whole in the world that you actually live in. Be a presence. Be someone that participates in this world. That's kind of the message that I want to bring to my generation. I think that for whatever reason, maybe this passage, I was meant to read this at this stage. What my generation needs to learn, what I need to learn, is that we need to cease trying to be experts fixing this problem and approach the issues that come to us with whatever expertise we have or don't have as people. The problem is not that we don't have enough expertise. The problem is we don't have enough humanity. And we don't have enough holiness. Maybe aphatha, or whatever that Semitic word is in Aramaic, that seems to communicate both a humanity and a holiness simultaneously. But whatever that openness is, it's something that our generation left behind. And that is the key to our own maladies, in my sense. We do not have a belief in ourselves, because we were never present for the world we now occupy. We were too concerned with our own little profile of being the saviors of a world that we can't even meaningfully occupy as people. People ask me about this COVID stuff all the time. This is the thing. Like, they ask me, like, okay, like, what, take the vaccine or don't take the vaccine, as if I could possibly answer this on a YouTube channel, right? Because if I gave the wrong answer, they'd shut me down. But even if I could give you the answer that I do, it would be more or less meaningless, because the problem is not that, I'm not an expert in virology. And even if we were to do the math is a balanced risk equation between the relative risks of the vaccine and the relative risks of this virus. We don't really, and the problem is that we don't believe the experts. There's ample reason to believe that the experts are themselves unreliable. I'm not so sure that the correct way to react to the situation is just to find the right online talking head to listen to, or to make sure that the online heads that you listen to are all signaling in the right way. The correct way to deal with this problem is in a very human way. Figure out what you can believe and go with that. I can't really tell you how much to believe the CDC. I can't tell you. They certainly haven't shown themselves to be trustworthy. Does that mean they're wrong on this? No, absolutely does not. And the mechanisms they have for testing these things are wholly different from the ones they use to lie to us about any number of things like masks and the ultimate origin of this virus. So that's another thing to consider. But more than just that, what you need to get through this situation, I guarantee you that this decision about vaccines or masking or all this other stuff, this is not going to be the last time you have to deal with one of these problems. What we need to cultivate inside of ourselves is an ability to live in the world, to be open to what's actually being presented to us, and to actually meaningfully make decisions that are good and own them. I think that requires a little bit more authenticity than my generation has been trained to participate in. We've been trained to follow the experts. We've been trained not to think about things. We haven't been trained to actually, and I'm being sexist here, we haven't been trained to approach the situation like men. To go, all right, this is what people are telling me, and I'm taking a calculated risk. And I'm going to own the fact that I'm going to take a calculated risk. And when I own the fact that I take a calculated risk, I'm going to respect people who take different calculated risks. Maybe their situation is different than mine. And at all times, I'm going to try to make myself an instrument of truth, because I understand how horrible it is to make a decision where there's a significant probability of bad things happening on both sides. And because of how horrible that is, truth is forever my ally and something I desire, and falsehood is something I detest. When you trust the experts, when you make yourself a slave to Mark Zuckerberg, when you make yourself a slave to profilicity, truth is kind of a conditional friend. It's only a friend to you when it makes your profile look better. And when it doesn't, it's your enemy. That's no way to live. That's no way to live as people. That's no way to live as men or women. And whatever Jesus meant by be open, he certainly didn't mean this. He certainly didn't mean this fake situation where we pursue truth in the constant light of our own narcissistic delusions as they exist digitally in the mainframe of Mark Zuckerberg and Google. He didn't mean that. I'm going to end this. I'm going to take a 5-minute break to refill my water. But this is sort of where I'm going from right now. I don't know who I'm talking to necessarily, but I know what I'm going for. What we're going for is we're going for a new world that feels authentic. Okay, we can't build a new world, right? Of course, maybe you can build a microcosm. Maybe you have a little homestead that you can build among yourself. That's all good. But whether you have a homestead or whether you're stuck in a pod in a blue metropolitan area, You want to walk out into the world and be in the world as a man or as a woman with a capital M with a capital W. You want to be open to it. Afghanistan, the fall of Afghanistan means the end of the delusion we've been in since 2001 that expertise is going to fix the world. And it means that we actually have to live in the America that we live in. We have to live in the world and not just simply treat the world we live in right now as if it's some kind of preamble for our own heroics that will occur in the future. As millennials always want, all millennials have had this problem for 20 years. They want to constantly have potential. They constantly want to be the people who actually are going to save the world. How about being the person who's actually in the world right now dealing with it? America is a totally different place than it was in 2001. It's kind of an exciting place in a grim, bleak sort of way. We are literally in the cyberpunk world that William Gibson predicted. But if you're inside of it in an authentic way, even if the world's evil, it kind of makes an interesting story. Or one that I think would be interesting. It doesn't read like a profile. It's not going to earn you any popularity on social media, but at least we can do something genuine. At least maybe at this point, now that all the narcissistic delusions are falling away faster than we can count them, maybe by being authentic in the world, we can create sort of the stories that will go forward. You know, sort of to follow the other thing in my title, to create sort of the legends, to create sort of the yearning that's going to lead to something that's better down the line. I don't know. It's worth a shot. I don't know what that's going to mean in my new life on the East Coast, but that's what I want to explore in my videos. We'll see how well I explore it. So, hey guys, I'm going to take a 5-minute, well, probably more like a 30-second break to get a refill on my water. And then when I come back, I'll answer your questions on entropy, and we'll have the second half of the live stream. So with that being said, guys, I'll see you in 30 seconds. All right, I'm back. Oh God, look that mark. I don't want to blame this on I think this is when my son kind of bought me, but this is not. That's way too big for anything. This is just some kind of structural problem with my nose. I don't know. This is. It's way too. It's way too. It's way too. I look like freaking Rudolph. What? It's the Owen Wilson nose. I'm telling you, it's way too long. Okay, and no one make the obvious joke. Okay. The joke might be funny if it was actually true. Okay, let's do this. I'll go over to entropy, and okay. So I have a haphazard way of doing this. I guess there's no boomer problems, right? I didn't forget to unmute myself or something. But anyway, I guess what we'll do is I'll alternate between the questions tab on entropy and the donations tab. And in lieu of not having either one, I will answer from the chat. Okay. Okay, so Nerve AMV Maker. Oh, okay. So just to reiterate, guys, I haven't donated anything to charity, but yet from the last two live streams because I haven't gotten a payment for entropy yet. Now they used to like deliver this in one big lump sum, and I'm sort of waiting for that to post my receipt. No, I haven't made a big deal about this since I haven't been doing many of these, but I will look into this and make sure that I actually post a receipt for this. But I want to make it clear that I don't feel it's appropriate for me to make money doing this because it confuses. And I understand, like, if you do this, if you stream professionally and you're a good faith actor, you absolutely have the right to charge and consume money you get from super chats. This is work. I think that this is easy work, to be quite honest. It's certainly not as stressful as any other job I've ever had, but it is work, and people who stream, I'm not placing judgment on them, but for my own purposes, my own aesthetic, I like being able to say this is 100% a passion project and I'm not taking money from it, short of literal expenses I have to recruit from equipment and stuff like that, So, but anyway, yeah. So, but I'll try to get that sorted out when I finally get the payment from Entropy. I don't know what the threshold is. I think it's $400 or something like that. Okay, so I should be getting it soon. So the first of the questions, if I highlight this here, will it appear on my screen? Let's see. Well, yeah, that's great. It's horribly missized. Maybe I can. You know what, guys? There's no way I'm going to be able to get the text large enough so that all the super chats fit inside the box. This is just my own boomerness, and I don't really want to start messing around with text sizes. Well, maybe I can. Is this thing that's easy? No, it's not. Okay. I'll mess around with OBS settings next time. In the meantime, I'll just answer the questions, and you can hear me read them out. At least the name appears in the box, I guess. Okay, so Nerve AMV Maker for USA $25. You mentioned last time when you were talking to Fritz Imperial that the right abandoned high culture because they couldn't do it anymore. I think they threw it away when the neocons deliberately ostracized the Southern traditionalists in the 1980s. Writers like Faulkner, Bradford, Foote, and others were right-wing, renowned, and we intently killed our artistic class. Yeah, I mean, and I don't know about Faulkner. I am a big Walker Percy fan. Oh, I can't believe I didn't mention this. This is one of the notes that I had as optional. But, speaking of the current moment we're in, where authenticity is struggling against psychological profilicity, speaking of a great Southern writer from the 70s and 80s, Walker Percy, he wrote a number of really good books. I've written a handful of them. And if you were to ask me 10 years ago what the best one is, I'd probably say Lost in the Cosmos. Right now, I'd say absolutely not. The one that's his best book for the time we live in is Love in the Ruins. If that is not a picture-perfect image of where we are in the culture war, I don't know what is. It's just the feeling of it is absolutely intense. And this is sort of a digression, but he was one of these Southern fiction writers that I think Nerve AMV Maker is mentioning here. He's absolutely an artistic class that and I think, what would you call Walker Percy right wing? He seems to come from an age where that doesn't seem to be a pertinent question, where a Southern writer could have obvious traditionalist tendencies but not be classified as right wing. I don't know. I mean, AMV Maker, to be honest, I stand by what I said with Fritz here. I do lament the National Conservative, the National Review, Conservative Incorporated, neocon movement in the 1980s. They absolutely stabbed the paleocons in the back, and they absolutely threw a lot of their Southern contingency right under the bus. No doubt about that. Absolutely sympathize with what you're saying there. But I just don't think, feel free to disagree with me with this. I just don't believe that this was the critical problem when it came to the right wing losing high culture in the late 1980s and the 1990s. The problem is that although I'm sure there were any number of base conservative Southern writers back in the 80s, like the ones you mentioned, the fact is that high culture just was not coming from rural areas in the 80s and 90s. And the reason is because we essentially blew the economy up of rural America in the 80s and 90s, to the extent that by the time the 2000s rolled around, there was the thriving communities that had been the backbone of these people previously were gone, and anyone who wanted to be somebody who did this stuff moved to the big cities and tried to make it there. And I'm sorry, but I don't want to let off the, this is another thing too. I oftentimes feel that we're sort of trying to let ourselves off the hook here. I would really love to believe that the original vampires of our problems are the neocons. And all of our problems, they lead right back to Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz and the people that come from that school who work for National Review. I would love to say that, but so much of this is also just laziness on the part of the conservative Americans that made up Red America at this time. I was talking to someone on Discord. I asked permission for him to talk about this term. Oh God, what's its name? I don't know what his Discord name is. Please forgive me. I don't remember what your Discord handle was, and I can't look it up now. I'll try to cite him later when I use this term again, and I know I will. But he talked about his term for this person was dads, which was deracinated American dipshits. And you know these people if you've lived through the 2000s as somebody who was older than 18. These are the people who are all on board with the America Fuck Yeah project. They were like hardcore Red Americans, and there were a fair number of them even living in blue communities back in the 2000s. They loved America. They loved our shitty beer. They thought that America was all about my freedom and my ability to live out my life the way I wanted to. And they had absolutely no culture. They had absolutely no understanding of broader history. They liked all sorts of degenerate crap, like, big-breasted women and Pamela Anderson and scantily clad cheerleaders. They had no understanding that their consumption habits were directly leading to the undermining of everything they held dear in their values, and they were just along for the ride. I don't know. I mean, so much of the situation we're in, where we turned our back on high culture, basically came from the fact that conservatism and the conservative temperament gave into sort of a comfortableness with the status quo, and that was not simply a product of our elites. That came from the fact that we couldn't basically eat our cake and have it at the same time. We can't participate in the fruits of, consumerism overall or the sexual revolution when it comes to our own ability to pursue freedom, and then be surprised when the bill comes due and we don't want to pay it anymore. I mean, we basically played right into the stereotype of privilege. Now, of course, privilege originally means private law. That's what it literally means. But the way it's sort of come to exist in the American lexicon in the 20th century was privilege was sort of an unearned right. Rights were the kind of thing that you had and exercised because you either earned them just by being a person, which is ridiculous in my opinion, but sort of beyond the scope of this conversation, or and if you didn't earn them or didn't have a right to them, they were privilege, right? And that kind of fits the stereotype of the deracinated American dipshit. The deracinated American dipshit didn't have the right to just consume product from China, never wonder where his products are made or the conditions they're made in, never concern himself about the condition of the American working class, and at the same time totally indulge in all of the semi-pornographic media consumption that was everywhere in the 2000s and call that his God-given right. He had no right to do any of that stuff. He was undermining the very thing that he valued. And by that sense, it was clearly privilege. And I think that a lot of the reason why white privilege got traction during this time was that there were these people who were frankly trying to rest on the laurels of their ancestors while undermining the virtues of their ancestors. And people will naturally hate that. And if you're giving them this great word like white privilege to describe that, they'll buy into that to a large degree. What's so ironic is now the word white privilege is being used by white boomers to essentially betray their grandchildren. They're saying they're basically convincing themselves that because the boomers are convincing themselves that because their parents had something that basically the boomers benefited from, that the way to make that right is to punish their grandchildren for their skin color and essentially set them up to be basically disadvantaged and treated with contempt by a society that treats them as the source of all major contemporary problems. And that's what white privilege means today. And if that's it, then fuck that. Because that is the definition of privilege itself. The people who use white privilege are benefiting from a sort of generational privilege themselves when they use it that way. And they're using it for the worst possible reason. They're using it as an excuse to be a traitor against their own posterity. And I have no patience for that. Guys, give me 1 second. I need to adjust my chair. I need to just kill the camera here. All right, sorry about that. Okay. So I hope that answers your question. Again, Nerve and VMaker, as much as I would love it that you were right, and all of our problems are just the original vampire of the neocons, this is actually really bothering me now. I'm going to actually try to fix this. Give me a second, guys. Good Lord. I'll fix it if I can. If I just double this, will it work? Okay. Sorry about this. Actually. Great. Did I completely destroy it now? Oh well. Screw it. It's bothering me though. Sorry guys. Just a few more minutes here while I fix this. Consider this part of the intermission here. That looks more promising. Okay, well. All right, well, I guess you can kind of read it now. All right, well, let's just go on here. Okay, so Ben White for USA $3. You guys can hear me, right? Okay. As a recent uni undergrad who got a decent paying job at a major bank, I'm feeling very listless. All my life, I had a defined goal: do well in school and go to a good university. Do good in university, get a good job. Well, this is sort of the Fight Club thing, right? Where Jack's talking to Tyler Durden, and he literally said just what Ben White's saying to me now. When he got out of college, he talked to his dad, and his dad said, "Oh, get a job." And he got a job, and he talked to his dad, and his dad said, "Oh, we'll start a family." And Jack's response is, "Well, I can't start a family." And Tyler Durden characteristically says, "I'm wondering if another woman is really the answer we're looking for." Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling like this. I think maybe, Ben, you're feeling that if starting a family was achievable, that might, I'm just guessing here, but a lot of millennials feel that if starting a family were available to them, that actually might even be a worthwhile goal. At any rate, whether it's a family or a vocation, I think that this is actually a great question. Something's got to give here. Something has to be done where people can derive meaning from it. And I work a job, and to be quite honest, the job pays the bills. I'm not particularly passionate about it. It's highly technical. I think most people will consider it a good job. But it's not something that I think gives me meaning. My family gives me meaning. To a much more limited degree, this YouTube channel gives me meaning. And hopefully a community I can build in the future and contribute to will give some meaning too. But I guess maybe I see another super chat here too. Okay, sorry, it continues. I talked to some of my college friends who moved to other cities, and most of them, regardless of ethnicity, feel the same. I guess America's melting pot has melted us all down to depressed wages. Let's break this down. 100% agree with you. But let's constructively think of solutions to this problem, because I would maintain, and I don't know if you follow me here, how many things do we really need to have meaning in our lives? So we need to be present in our lives, like I was saying in this live stream. We need to actually occupy the world we exist in. We need to have sort of virtuous or holy existences. Holy is a little bit of a tall order. But we need to have some amount of connection to virtue or spirit. And then we need to have deep human connections and deep human commitments. A family solves part of that problem. A community solves another part of that problem. And some contact with a teleological reality solves yet a third part of that problem. I don't know if this is what you're asking, because it doesn't appear that there's a question in this statement. But not to contradict Fight Club, which I know is sacred to our generation, maybe trying to make some of these commitments is the answer we're looking for. If nothing else, just try to actually look around the world that we're in and kind of experience it. Take it in. I know that we're supposed to all be quarantining, maybe, depending on what state you're in. Or if you're, God forbid, you're in Australia or New Zealand. I don't even want to... Well, I do want to think about what's happening there, but I don't want to... I hope that, aside from the Franklin, everyone's staying clear of that continent or subcontinent or whatever we're calling it now. But I'm not so sure that there's meaning without commitment. And there certainly isn't meaning without presence. I would say go out into your community and just try to get a sense of where you are. And if this community is totally unworthy or an impossible starting point to find something that's more meaningful in terms of a commitment, then maybe think strategically about that problem and go elsewhere. People give online dating a lot of crap, and rightfully so, because it's destroyed our society at a large scale. But someone commented this. They said that I don't know, where did I see this comment? I feel terrible because I'm not crediting these people, and so much of this talk has just been me citing people that have been saying more interesting things that I have to say right now. But did someone tell this to me, or did I read this in someone else's comment section? They said, get off online dating and meet girls in real life is the millennial equivalent, is the Zoomer equivalent of the boomers telling millennials to just go to the CEOs of company and hand them your resume. Older millennials will recognize this, that in the 2000s, when you asked a boomer, you asked your parents how you should get a job, they're like, well, you just go to a company that does what you're doing and hand the CEO your resume. And if they like you, they'll give you a job. And you're thinking, has anyone actually done this? This seems to come from a world that just doesn't exist anymore. And I think when you tell people, when you tell Zoomers in particular, or younger millennials, to meet girls in bars or something, you're basically telling them to participate in a world that no longer exists. However, the reason why you go to bars to talk to girls, and I don't recommend bars, but the reason why you go to meet people in real life is not to actually meet romantic prospects, but it's to sharpen your skills and not to be so socially awkward. You're basically just trying. It's basically like going to the gym, going to the quote unquote bar, by which we mean any kind of social interaction where classically there could be a potential to meet the opposite sex. So any social interaction that isn't like a board game cafe, right? Where that's kind of cheating, right? Because you're already in a group that's so horribly socially awkward, you can't reasonably be expected to practice your social skills. Um, and yeah, I lost my train of thought temporarily there. But that's what you're trying to do there. I wouldn't necessarily throw online dating completely under the bus, because if you use it in the right way, you can make it work. I obviously found my wife on a dating app, and I found her on a religious dating app. And the thing is that you need to keep in mind is that online dating works. It basically works to put you in contact with people that you probably would have met in a healthy society anyway. So I met my wife on online dating, but even if the internet didn't exist, we could have very well met anyway, and I wouldn't have been surprised if we had met before, because we were both very involved in religious communities that frequently did things together, across the border, and there was a very small set of dating individuals inside that circle to begin with. So when you do online dating, don't think of it like a giant smorgasbord or a menu. Think of it like, okay, my goal here is to find a community where there's a very, very small set of people that are selecting from each other. Religious communities work very well in online dating because they're small, because they've got requirements. Don't bother using religious dating sites if you're not 100% on board with the religion in question. People do this all the time. This is the worst possible way. But if you use a Catholic dating site, and this is the worst thing ever, and you guys do this, they're like, well, I'm pro-life, but I'm not like 100% on the whole no sex before marriage thing. And what the guy is thinking, right? What the guy is thinking to himself is, okay, well, what I mean is I'm pro-life, and when I say that I'm not 100% on the no sex before marriage thing, what I basically mean is it's okay to sleep with a girl you're engaged with. So basically like 1950s rules, or basically 20th century rules for dating, which is like premarital sex if it's literally premarital, right? Which is technically anti-Catholic, but it's much more understandable than the ridiculous rules we have now. And internally to your own mind, as a guy, that makes sense, because you're not actually asking a girl to do anything that's unreasonable. And maybe a Catholic site is a way to meet trad girls. To any Catholic, self-respecting Catholic girl, that's a total slap in the face, because she's not seeing your caveats. She's not seeing like how your heresy isn't the worst possible heresy in the world, and that actually, if you think about it really hard in a non-autistic way, there's a way to kind of make this make sense. All she's seeing is you're a hypocritical heretic who doesn't even believe what they preach enough to limit your own sexual appetites. They're not going to select you, and frankly, they shouldn't. If you play by the profilicity rules, you have to die by the profilicity rules, right? And unfortunately, dating has moved from authenticity to profilicity. So the point is as much as that's a horrible thing, the point is to use the profilicity rules to your advantage. Go to a dating site that has a very, very small pool of people and that has a very, very large pre-selection criterion. Religious dating sites are better than non-religious dating sites. Matchmakers are probably better than dating sites. Online matchmakers are probably better than online dating sites writ large. As far away from Tinder as you possibly can get would be my recommendation. And then you play by the rules when you're in that community. And if you have a heresy that's genuine and that's a true confessional heresy and not some weird kind of cheating or weird kind of attempt to subvert religious belief, which are disgusting heresies, any heresy you can phrase as I struggle with X as opposed to I just deny X, then maybe you can work that out as part of the ordinary negotiating that goes on inside the relationship. And I'm not telling anyone to be a heretic. I'm not telling anyone to deviate from sexual norms. But I'm saying realistically, maybe you can work that out later. But being part of a moral community and playing into that is a necessary way to play the game and to go into a situation where authenticity can be the currency and not profilicity. So I've spent too long on that non-question. So I'll go on. I think the next one is Quo Peregrinator. Okay, this is great. Finally, a question. USA $25. Can you comment on the films of Terrence Malick as culture, as art, as evangelization? Oh yeah, great. Terrence Malick is a filmmaker who has spent the last 30 years making the same movie over and over and over and over again. Now, I happen to really like this movie. I have liked and hated Terrence Malick movies. Okay, let me break them down right now. Well, for those of you who are not enlightened on Terrence Malick is a Christian, progressive Christian, but still a genuine Christian, as far as I can tell, filmmaker who makes highly artistic films. And, these films, and he's been making films since the 70s. Odds are you've seen one of these films. Thin Red Line, Days of Heaven, Tree of Life, whatever. You've probably seen one of them. But these films are vistas of worlds that are incredibly picturesque visions of nature. And he does slow cut frames and transitions. And then he has dialogue that goes on in the background, usually with some kind of very minimalistic music or background nature sounds. And it's highly poetic and it's highly picturesque, and it communicates this deep sense of holiness that pervades every moment, while at the same time some kind of conflict is going on in the background that seems by comparison increasingly less relevant. So let's go through them. Days of Heaven, which is, I don't know if that's the first Terrence Malick movie, but it's really good. I liked it. It's about sort of semi-outlaws that in the early 20th century Wild West. I hate using the Wild West because it has nothing to do with cowboys, but it's in that Western environment, right? And these people living on the outside of law and legitimacy, and it's their lives from the perspective of a child. And I liked that one. It was deeply poetic. It seemed to communicate the deep contradictions, and the fact that it was slow and plodding seemed to be indicative of the late 19th century, early 20th century world that it came from, and the child's perspective that it was told from. Thin Red Line is about the Battle of Guadalcanal, sort of a Saving Private Ryan movie, but with the sort of Terrence Malick veneer on it. I thought that movie was a total train wreck. It was the same movie as Days of Heaven. It just didn't work for me. Tree of Life did work for me. And his most recent one that I watched with my wife, I forget what it was called. It was about some conscientious objector in a German town during World War II who did not want to take an oath to Adolf Hitler. And he was martyred for this. And I applaud his martyrdom. He's a very inspirational man. I hated that movie. The reason why I hated that movie was because I had recently worked on my father's biography, And I felt that, and of course, again, it's the same Terrence Malick movie where 90% of the movie is tableaus of like alpine vistas with poetic expressions going on in the background and meditations on, oh my God, life is so holy. If only we could see through this veneer that is, whatever petty politics is going on right in front of us. It's really weird and thin red line when the petty politics going on in front of us is literally Japanese machine gun encampments. But in this one, it's life in some alpine village that's way too picturesque for anything my ancestors experienced. I really kind of thought it was insulting because I had just done this whole... It wasn't insulting. I really respect the guy going to his death so that he wouldn't have to take an oath to Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler was a psychopath. Even if you think that the German people had legitimate grievances, he was a psychopath and a mass murderer, and I think it's uncontestable that he started World War II, even if some of the grievances of Germany were legitimate. And it's undisputable that his actions led to the destruction of Germans living in Eastern Europe, and the mass conversion of German people to the state that they are in right now. And he did everything to sabotage any kind of defense Germany could put up against the communists. And so I consider him a horrible person, and bravo for somebody standing up to that nonsense. I personally did not like Terrence Malick's perspective on other Germans who went along with that. They portrayed all the Germans who fought with Hitler as being sort of psychos who were just either go with the flow sheep, or who were foaming at the mouth Nazis who just were brimming over with hatred for Jews or whatever. From my reading of German communities, at least from the testaments that I've read and worked with from my family, this is not what was going on. Everyone could see that war was coming between, and maybe this is different in Germany than it was in the hinterlands, but everyone could see that war was coming between the Soviet Union and the Third Reich. And the decision that was in front of people at that time was, do you want to be on Team Hitler or do you want to be on Team Stalin? And if you're on Team Stalin and Team Stalin wins, that means that there's going to be horrific and murderous consequences for all the Germans. Okay, so that's a big suggestion if you're German. How can you blame anyone in that situation for choosing Hitler or Stalin? Especially if what's on the line there is, if Team Stalin wins, you're going to be raped and murdered, which they were when Team Stalin won. How can you blame anyone for making that decision? And to sit in the 20th century and to look at the Germans who made that difficult decision and fought on one of these horrible sides, to the ultimate doom of their own people, and to morally judge them feels a little bit like a low blow. As noble as this person's sacrifice was, who decided to stand up and be a conscientious objector against the Third Reich, I couldn't get that image out of my mind. And it just, I hate this is the worst part about our current our current profile obsessed age, is that we stand in judgment of people who had to make decisions that were so much harder than our own. And it's disgusting feeling this judgment. Okay, but I haven't even answered the user's question. The question was, how do I feel about it as art? I love when Terrence Malick is on, he's really on, and I love him. I love Tree of Life. I love Days of Heaven. Does that make him but it's the same movie, right? It's the same movie. And it's really on the nose. That's another thing I don't like. And it's on the nose in a good way. He makes it work. But it's the same movie over and over again, right? So I'll give Terrence Malick credit for making one really good movie and making it again and again, and sometimes it works. I don't think that you can really copy Terrence Malick and have that be a repeatable archetype. A, because I think that the kind of messages Terrence Malick wants, um, I think Christians try this on the nose kind of commentary a little bit too much. And as artistic as Malick is and his portrayal of that, it is on the nose sort of stuff. And I think that you need a little bit more nuance for modern people or postmodern people. And it certainly does. It's certainly terrible for evangelization. All the new atheists who see Terrence Malick know that they're consuming. They know that they're consuming undercover Christian evangelism, and they immediately balk at it. And those who don't, as soon as they learn he's Christian, they tap into this. People who are coming from a conservative point of view in general, I don't know why this is continuously a thing, but if you have some kind of political message or religious message as part of your subtext, you either need to make that really explicit, like Malick does, or you need to pitch that thing so subtly that no one, that even you don't know that you're necessarily saying that kind of thing. And people continuously make this mistake. You will activate postmodern people's uncanny valley instinct before you know it, and you're gonna be in trouble. So that's the end of the question super chats. I will now go to the standard donations. So now it goes from the bottom, or does it go from the top? Entropy needs to make this a little bit more clear. Okay. All right. I don't know if this is the top or the bottom, but we're doing this one first anyway. Hero Kev for USA $3. Henry Morgenthau Jr. was a monster. I did an essay on Allied war crimes, and even my ultra-progressive English professor, who thinks cuties is an appropriate course material, came to the same conclusion. Or who is Henry Morgenthau Jr.? Okay. Secretary Treasury. Well, how? I mean, he sounds like part of the New Deal Roosevelt administration apparatchik. I mean, I have no problem believing that somebody in charge of the Allied war effort was a monster. There were all of the world wars were perpetrated by a bunch of people, a bunch of sides that were just riddled through with brutal people who had no qualms about murdering people, destroying cultures, and rolling over entire ways of life in tank treads. I'm not saying that there weren't heroes on all sides, but there certainly were villains on all sides. And I don't doubt if you're telling me that Mr. Morgenthau was one of these monsters. If he's part of the New Deal, he probably has a better than 50% chance of being a monster. I'll say that. Okay. So the next one is Zero Kev again for USA $25. Do you think NRX creators are safe from the cathedral attacking them like the alt-right after Charlottesville? With NRX ideas starting to go mainstream, thanks to R. and McIntyre, the cathedral could come to the conclusion that NRX is a threat that must be purged. They've already started labeling January 6 LARPers as the real Taliban. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure they will. I'm sure they are going to come after NRX eventually. The problem is that, safe is a little too strong of a word. We absolutely aren't safe. They absolutely will come after us eventually. But the thing is that, unlike the alt-right, which was doing everything in its power to taunt the lions, we actually are. So do you ever heard of the thing called an attractive display from evolutionary biology? So an attractive display. So so in the veldt, or do they still call it the veldt or the savanna? I think that's what it's called now, right? they're all of these antelope type things, or antelope and antelope caribou creatures, or the caribou are northern creatures, whatever they're called. No, the herbivores that the lions feed on. And when the lions get close, the first thing that a lot of these guys do is they start jumping, like hopping up like Energizer bunnies. And the lions haven't even started running after them yet. So why do they do this, right? Because they hop up and down and exert all this energy in front of the lions. And the lions haven't even begun to chase them. The lions are just thinking, am I hungry enough to start chasing these guys? Is this going to be a hunt day right now? So why are they tiring themselves out before the chase begins? Well, they're tiring themselves out because they want to communicate to the lion that they're a hard target. So what the alt-right did was it did an attractive display. They went up to the cathedral and they slapped it right in the face and they said, you don't have shit on us. And the cathedral unloaded on them, and apparently the cathedral was able to destroy them because they made themselves vulnerable. The NRX has to be, I think the NRX is a lot, I wouldn't say that no one is invulnerable. The fastest gazelle or whatever can get taken down by the lion, for sure. But we're a lot smarter and we're a lot faster. And when we do attractive displays, I think we'd be a lot harder for a lion to chase down. Our attractive display isn't bullshit. We actually can run pretty quickly. And we actually would be very difficult for the cathedral to take down. I'm not bragging when I say this, but I am a pretty hard topic for the cathedral's 2 minutes of hate. And so is Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin is a nerdy guy who comes from San Francisco. He talks like a computer programmer. So do I. I'm not saying I couldn't. You can say anything about anybody, right? But you need to lie a lot to get me to look like a neo-Nazi. Because I'm not a neo-Nazi. You need to do a lot of dishonest stuff to get me ready for the 2 minutes of hate. Sort of Nick Sandman, one of the Covington kids, from 2019. You'd probably need to do that level of dishonesty. And I think that I can defend myself against that. The stuff out there about me that people circulate, that's all the bad stuff, it's all lies. It's all transparent lies. Some of it's lies from my past life that are demonstrable lies. Some of it's lies from my blogging career, people taking things out of context. But it's all lies. I'm not aware of anyone saying anything true about me ever that would make me, at any rate, amenable to the 2 minutes of hate. Obviously, they could destroy me if they wanted to, but it's a risk I'm taking. And pieces of shit, who understand I'm taking risks, like President Sunday or Faraday Speaks. They understand I'm taking a risk and they like to lord it over me. Like somehow this is going to give them power preemptively, force me to cancel myself. I'm sorry, man, but if you want to destroy me, you're going to have to catch me first. And I think the same thing is true with the NRX. I think we're definitely better than the alt-right. They're going to come after us. I think we'll be able to outrun them. And in the meantime, that's a risk we're taking, right? We're certainly not going to taste as good as the alt-right, that's for sure. No Antifa member is going to feel good about, destroying the lives of middle-class people, speaking earnestly about how they see the problems in the world playing out. I can say that. Or maybe they will, strangely, if I mentioned President Sunday, apparently he's in the YouTube news today for just the... I almost forgot about him, and then I turned on I was watching Sargon of Akkad talk about a new YouTube video, a new YouTube video maker, and this YouTube video maker had the misfortune of talking to President Sunday, and it's just the most disingenuous. I think the guy's called Doomer. What is it called? Doomer Reactions or something like that. That's the YouTuber. But he talks to President Sunday about his attacks on Vosh. And I wouldn't ordinarily, I wouldn't ordinarily talk about this person because I think he uses negative publicity to promote himself. But Sargon's talking about him today, so I feel like the horse is already out of the barn at this stage. And you listen to this, and this conversation between Doomer Reacts and President Sunday. Sorry, I'm gonna I actually need to figure out. I want to make sure I'm actually giving publicity to the new YouTuber here, to the extent that I'm talking about anybody. What is this person's name? Doomer Politics is the name. Yeah, so this conversation with President Sunday is just one of the most disingenuous things I've ever seen in my entire life. You can't believe it, and it's the classic thing that these midwits do, is that they reframe the debate until you're on trial and they get to determine the standard of evidence. So in order to make any one of your points, you have to essentially deliver a mathematical proof. Every one of their statements is just sort of assumed to be true by the framework of the conversation at the same time. And, this dishonest little piece of shit runs Doomer Politics through the ringer because he doesn't understand how a frame game works. And he doesn't understand that he's being essentially trolled. And what's so ironic, I realized when watching this, is that the reason, one of the main reasons why Bosch and President Sunday, one of the main reasons why their con works, they can be just completely dishonest. They can be complete grifters. Why, I don't know, President Sunday a grifter, he makes almost no money, so he sucks at it if he's grifting. But he's being a dishonest little shit for sure. The reason why it works is because their voices are so good. I mean, that's one of the things that I immediately noticed about Bosch, is that he looks like a complete, bug man. But the voice that comes out of his body is this deep, luscious baritone. It's amazing. Same thing with President Sunday. The guy looks like evil Napoleon Dynamite. He's just absolute falling apart. Ugh. But what comes out of his of this horrible visage is this very nice voice. Completely, I count me as envious on this front. I hate my voice. And people point this out every now and again. I look at my YouTube comments and someone's like, "You've got a lisp. You talk with a nasally voice. You didn't enunciate words properly." I mean, tell me something I don't know. I'm an engineer who went into engineering because he didn't want to have to correct his own inability to pronounce words correctly. I developed a hobby of being a vlogger late in life, and fortunately I'm in my 30s now, so my ability to correct my my nasal lisp, which comes from having a narrow nasal passageway, congratulations, the same cause of this stupid nose that constantly gets red every time it gets hit. My ability to fix that at this stage of my life is rather limited. It won't take a large amount of time investment. So, I guess I'm stuck with the voice I have. But it maybe it really bothers people, I guess, because as a consumer product, I'm a little less good. But these people who grift with this stuff, it's amazing because the biggest whoppers and the worst face arguments, they sound good because the guys have really deep and good voices. It's tragic. It's absolutely tragic. Millennial Woes pointed this out too. It's just anyway, but thank you very much for Zero Kev. I appreciate the concern. Yeah, that's coming, but what can you do about it? Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker for $3 USA. The fact that the Greek word for witchcraft is pharmakia has got me rereading scripture in light of modern pharma. Possible literal witches? Oh, Cringewalker, thank you so much for not... Cringewalker, were you the person who came up with the dads thing? I'm sorry, I don't want to put you on the spot, but was that you? Were you the guy who did the deracinated American dipshit? I'm sorry if I'm misattributing. I don't know. The Greek word for witch being close to the Greek word for pharmacology. I mean, that's not surprising, though, is it? Right? Because we all know that the words for magic and magi and magus, they all come from this ancient word of knowing or being learned or being of letters. You know, the magi who visited Jesus with gifts, they weren't actually sorcerers, were they? But the name has the same origin. And you know, we all know that these words for knowledge in an ancient context come from the same places. And you know, we are in a place where our own magi, our own learned cathedral, our own priest class has betrayed us. It's no longer invested in us as people. It no longer is interested in healing us in any way. And it's frankly being as dishonest as it possibly can be to technically stay within the bounds of its own rules. And you know, it's corrupted science, it's corrupted medicine, it's corrupted learning, it's a corrupted priest class. And you know, the only way to do this is to find some way to get to a non-corrupted priest class. Thank you for the short question so I can get through this. Oh, I already answered that question. Okay, great. Society Man. Hey, how's it going, man? It's been a long time since I talked to Society Man. But I'm glad to always see you here, man. Really appreciate it. I do hope that I can do some community building in 2022. It'll be tragic if I can't, but I have learned against promising things. Society Man for USA $3. There are some good books and good movies about the quest for authenticity. Catcher in the Rye, that's a good one. Catcher in the Rye, Inside Llewyn Davis come to mind. Is it even possible to make good art about profilicity? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, that's Catcher in the Rye is basically, people say that the Catcher in the Rye was, it really started with the Beat Generation. The Beat Generation was the first generation to really pursue authenticity in a real way. And The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger was right up there. And in many ways, J.D. Salinger, being a recluse himself, that kind of augmented the mystery of authenticity. The movie for A Quest for Profilicity, well, I don't know. I mean, that's basically the career of ContraPoints. You could call ContraPoints' entire career The Quest for Profilicity. In fact, Philosophy Tube's entire career could be called The Quest for Profilicity. I wonder how it ends. I don't know. I can't imagine it ends. What would you achieve at the end of Profilicity? Would it be wisdom? Would it be some threshold of followers? Are people actually happy with what they've achieved at the end of this? I don't know. I mean, this Philosophy Tube's the best example of this. I couldn't watch his latest video. It was so fake. It was so fake that even, like, it's sort of breaking the fourth wall where it's like, oh, hey, did you know I'm fake? Hey, how about this fake idea? Do you want to fake examine it with me so I can come to some fake conclusions? That's basically what the video. You know, Morgoth in his excellent video points this out too. ContraPoints and the Broken Violin, or Afghanistan and the Broken Violin. You watch this ContraPoints video, it's a total slog. Like, they have absolutely nothing to say. Absolutely nothing to say. Inside Llewyn Davis, that's a harder one. I don't consider Inside Llewyn Davis to be one of the stronger Coen Brothers movies. It is in some ways about authenticity, because it is about the Beat Generation, which was all about authenticity. But I think that the conclusion of Inside Llewyn Davis is that, insofar as it has a conclusion, is that there are a lot of people who are trying to be these phenomenons like Bob Dylan, but very few of them ever attain that. And you're sort of watching a piece of history that was never discovered. Just think about how many great musicians just sort of never made it. back in the day, that was always sort of the ambition. I remember doing this, maybe older millennials will remember this. I was the last generation that did this. Millennial Woes has mentioned this too. And I have actually behind me, I don't know if you can see this, probably you can't actually. Well, inside that cabinet there is a collection, right behind me, is a collection of old vinyls. And so, back in the day, a large amount of my disposable income was going through used bookstores and going through used music scores and trying to find the hidden gems. Those little pieces of music. You'd find this album and nobody would know about it. And you'd be the first person to discover this artist or this book or whatever. And that would make you like a more authentic person. If you read this and actually benefited from this, you'd have some kind of deeper understanding of yourself. And now that's all gone, right? Because what good is a vinyl record if you can't share it on social media? What good is reading a book if you can't turn it into content? And of course, you're not going to discover anything for the first time, right? That's what the internet's for. Everything's on the internet. So the idea that you'd find something small that's been swept away, it's no longer there. And Inside Llewyn Davis is about what it is to be one of the parts of an age that's swept away once the winners are decided. But yeah, I don't know. I think the movies about profilicity are literally being made on YouTube right now. And they're thoroughly depressing, in my opinion. Arturo for $5 USA. First time listener, long time caller. Don't spend this all on booze. Well, I can tell you that I'm going to spend a certain amount of this on entropy. And then the rest is going to go into whatever charity I donate this to. I don't know, maybe Alcoholics Anonymous? I can spend it all on booze that way. Thank you very much, though, for the contribution. Sam153 for USA $10. Great e-thoughts, Dave. My e-thoughts don't live on OnlyFans, guys. And they're spelled with a U. You really have a knack for contextualizing recent events. Thanks for recommending Margin Call from earlier distances. I heard you quoted earlier in the stream. God, I have a recommended recommended videos. I keep on forgetting to put those on my wife's channel. God, I hope no one super chats me, reminding me to do that again, because I've just wasted their money. Because I don't know, with the move, obviously, I'm not going to remember to do all these things. But thank you very much. I hope people, guys, actually, I can't recommend Love. Is it Love in the Ruins? If that's not the Walker Percy book, I'm gonna kick myself, not kill myself. Let me just make sure. If it's Lust in the Ruins, okay, it is actually Love in the Ruins. Okay. Knowing my own brain, it's probably like Love Around the Ruins, or Affection in the Ruins, or maybe it wasn't Walker Percy, it was Warren Percy. I'm pretty sure it was Walker Percy, but it is indeed Love in the Ruins. I can't recommend that book enough. I really think that is. I haven't read everything Walker Percy ever wrote, and as a matter of fact, I think in some ways Walker Percy's eternal legacy will always be the person who discovered Confederacy of Dunces when the author when the author killed himself. He discovered and published the manuscript that was left behind. And lo and behold, that's more famous than any one of his things, and in one of his other books. But thank you very much. I'll try to get that video out. This is interesting. From Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker. The word vanity is actually the same word as Abel's name. Abel of Abels. It can be understood as all are the failed son of Adam. Well, I mean, that's an alternative definition that adds context. I don't know. This sort of gets back to, so, okay, so this is sort of, this is sort of, so the King James translation, right? Um, I am a defender of the King James translation. Now, there's this sort of like, I consider that the King James translation has, since the boomers, since the 60s, has been much decried and much put upon by modern studiers of the Bible, namely because since it was written during the reign of the King James as being the definitive English language translation of the Bible. This is highly scandalous for Catholic Europe. We always didn't go to vernaculars. And in the 60s, in the 1960s, I should say, it fell into disrepute because this was essentially crafted for an era of poetry. The translators took a lot of liberty with the translations, and because of that, it's not an accurate translation as much as the new international version or whatever is. It's just, and of course, I feel the midwit take is to go like, oh, did you know the King James translation isn't an accurate translation of the Bible? The problem is that the accurate translations of the Bible don't flow. They don't sound like poetry. And the Bible, or most books of the Bible, were supposed to be read in verse. So the King James translation suggests you read the Bible in a way that's much more like the people would have read it when it was actually in Hebrew, or sometimes in New Testament Greek. So here, let me talk about my favorite psalm. All right, so Psalm 2. Okay, King James Version. Okay, can we get multiple translations? Here, I could read them in both translations. New International Version. Okay. Okay, let's read it in both translations here. King James Version. That's the new King James Version. I went the old King James Version. The new King James Version defeats the entire point of the King James Version. Okay, so here, let's just do here. Let's just do this. Okay, so this is Psalm 2 in King James. Okay, so it goes, why did the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder, and cast their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set a king among my holy hill on Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord had said unto me, thou art my son, this day I have begotten thee. Ask of me, and I shall give thee heathen for thine inheritance, of utmost part the earth for their possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but little. Blessed are they who put their trust in him. I mean, what could you say about that absolutely magnificent piece of English poetry? I understand it's not an exact translation from the Hebrew, right? But it communicates the message. And just reading that right now, it feels fresh. I mean, does it, when you look at people like Bauchi and you look at these corrupt oligarchs, when you look at these people who are just completely involved in their own narcissism at the detriment of their own people, at the detriment of the world, and you see the rage that they just heap upon the people who are in their way. Do you not find yourself asking, why did the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? Why did the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? I feel like I ask myself that every day. Okay, let's look at this in the New International Version. Why did the nations conspire and the people plot in vain? All of the poetry is completely missing from that statement. It tracks two words that are big buzzwords in our contemporary imaginations, which are conspire, because if we use conspire or conspiracy, it immediately means it's not actually happening, right? It removes the idea of rage, which is in the initial translation, which I believe was, I don't know, I'm guessing that was sort of implied by the original Hebrew, but a big context of the imagistics that go into the poetry are now missing from the New International Version. I don't know, it misses the point. So what I'll say about this translation, I'm sorry, not digression, I apologize for that. What I will say about this digression is, that is, I think, a good observation, that when the author of Ecclesiastes is saying vanity of vanities, all is vanity, what he is saying is, look at the wretched state of the children of Adam. But I think that I think that the people who translated that into vanity of vanities, all is vanity, I think that they were comprehending a little bit more of the poetic context of this verse. I do think underneath the hood, it's implied that part of the reason that the people are in such a decrepit state is that they preferred flattering and prideful delusions over a genuine love of God and their people. That's the and I'm not making this up. That's the context. I mean, of course, I haven't read this in Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew. But that's the context of the entire book of Ecclesiastes, right? I mean, probably. I don't know. Maybe I'm just full of it. But thank you. I mean, that direct translation does add a certain flavor to it that enriches the passage. Very much so. Pseudo-analyst for $5 US. Just have authentic conversations with other reactionaries. Start a book or film club. Do it offline. Do it online. Build up your own community. The left won the online parasocial space. We shouldn't be participating in that to begin with. 100% pseudo-analysis. I totally agree with you. We have lost the parasocial struggle. We are not that kind of thing. Now, that does not mean we can ignore the parasocial. It does not mean we can or have to ignore profilicity as the dominating social driver of our time. We have to find a way to get around that, to essentially cut around this obstacle on the road. And that's our task. But we're not that kind of thing. So the people the way I see this thing is the internet, I should say, is as a tool that needs to be somehow contained and used in very limited fashion. Now, when I was a kid in the 90s, there was a reporter who went to Amish country, and they got back from Amish country, and they said, well, oh my God, was it a reporter or was it somebody? It was somebody who was speaking, I think, on NPR. And they say, well, did you know? People oftentimes overrate how technologically backwards the Amish are. For instance, I was at an Amish store, and they were selling me stuff, and the person had to communicate. And so they went out to the barn, and they had a phone in the barn, and they used the phone in the barn. And then they came back inside, and, that means that they use phones. And I'm thinking, okay, that's great. Actually, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I don't consider that to be a bug in the Amish's code. I consider that to be an ingenious invention. They discovered, it suggests that they've discovered that the phone technology is something that is useful. It's useful to be able to communicate with people over long distances. But maybe it's better if we have our phones in a place that you had to put on a jacket to use, so that you're not comfortable using it. So that if you want to talk to somebody in New York, you actually have to make an effort and dial them up and not be just comfortable in talking to somebody in a disembodied way, when the embodied people are right next to you. To me, the internet's the same way. It's very we can't ignore it. We have to be able to use the functionality of the internet. Oh my God, did I literally just, someone texted me and I literally picked up a phone in the middle of talking about how we shouldn't be slaves to the internet. Physician, heal thyself. Nose, heal thyself. But okay, the point is, we need to limit the internet while not limiting its functionality. Parasocialism and profilicity, I don't see any benefit to those. We need to limit those while maximizing the communication impact we can procure from it. If mailing lists, and Substack is a great example of that. Substack seems to have created a system where you can distribute your ideas to an enormous number of people while minimizing the social media aspect of that and minimizing the informational control aspect of that. Because it almost exclusively uses technology from Web 1.0, it skirts around those problems. Substack is equivalent to having a phone in your barn, basically. It's social media without the negative impacts of social media. And so maybe that's how we do it, right? We need to keep our eyes open for things. I'm not saying we all go back to Usenet. That's the problem with Usenet, is that it sucks. It's old technology. It's Web 1.0. It basically is less powerful than Web 2.0 or Web 3.0. There's got to be a way to use Web 1.0 without the same problems occurring on Web 1.0. Discord is a powerful tool. It's also highly addictive. It also prioritizes and promotes the worst parasocial behavior I've ever seen. Is there a way to create Discord without those problems? Matrix solves one of those problems by not getting me banned every 6 months. But if Matrix got as popular as Discord, would it stop the parasocial problems? I think we need another layer of security over that, right? But what we need to think about here is layering human security systems over existing technology to make them safe. Put your phones in the barn. Maybe it's a band-aid to say create rules for yourself. And I obviously haven't created good enough rules for myself, but that's a good first step, right? I'll see how that works with my own attempts to create community on the East Coast now, I guess. Ben White for US $3. I talked to some of my college friends who moved to their cities. Oh, I'm sorry. I already answered this. I apologize. I guess I am literally going backwards. Okay. So, the Traditionalist for $3 USA. Even mainstream foreign policy guys have been saying that America's promises have been worthless since 2008, and this just finalizes it. Yeah, but this finalizes it. This is the thing with promises, though, right? Game of Thrones was a shit. Well, I like the first two. I like the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones. And the books, had their moments, even though I consider George R. R. Martin to be completely uninspired at a macrocosmic level. But one of their things is they had their moments, and one of their moments was this parable about, a man with a sword comes, he's got like 3 loaves to distribute, and everyone's starving, and there's like a king and a clergy and, the most beautiful woman in the world and all the stuff. Where does power actually lie? And the answer to this riddle is power lies where men think it lies. And the same thing is true with promises. Promises lie where you think they lie. And, you could say that our promises were worthless since 2008, but a lot of people thought that they were worth something. Well, after 2008, I'm sure that they took a big step down in 2008, but they took a bigger step now, just for the simple reason that a lot less people believe them now. A lot less people now believe that the United States saying we have your back means that we have your back. Taiwan is already staring down the sights of China. We all know that that's going to happen. And after that happens, the United States' promises are worth a lot less. And that's not limited to foreign policy. I think a lot of people in the cathedral, a lot of people in the mainstream journalism, when Iraq failed, when Iraq failed, I don't think anyone in the cathedral really took a hit from that. The failure sort of stayed inside the purview of the foreign policy establishment, and in particular the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now what we have is, now I think the cathedral is realizing that foreign policy setbacks, they don't stay in foreign policy. They become America's setbacks. They become, well, we just don't believe in anything America does. And that's really what's transitioning us to this next stage of America in concept. Okay, great. I already answered the Earth and VMaker. Okay, great. Oh, here's a great question. Well, I'm thinking about before I read it, because I'll have to think about more. So Michael for USA $3 says, any tips on getting into classical music for people with zero classical music knowledge? Interesting. There's so many ways to do this. Okay, let me tell you about... I figure that the only people who are still watching this are people who like to hear me go on digressions about the King James Bible or whatever. So you're not going to mind me going on a digression about classical music either, right? But, okay, so like my experience with classical music. So my father is really into classical music. So that's how I always interacted with classical music, is through my father. And then in college, I tried to develop my own musical taste. And this sort of involved me getting a bunch of classical music guys so in college, my thing was, and this reveals me as a pretentious midwit, right? My thing is that minimalism is awesome. And of course, Philip Glass is part of that. I loved Einstein on the Beach and all that stuff. And minimalism is awesome. Early modern music like Rachmaninoff is awesome. Sibelius is cool. I liked violas a lot, right? I liked violas, and anything that had viola in it from the early modern period was right up there. And small-t romantic stuff was overdone and overplayed. I couldn't stand Beethoven because it was overplayed, right? And I'd have all these pretentious opinions about it. And the problem with classical music, is that it's just such a status symbol that it's hard to actually enjoy without it becoming an immediate status symbol. And so looking back on that, it's hard to disaggregate what was posed from what was me actually enjoying it. So, and I think that I was really against Mahler, and I thought like Vivaldi is overplayed. I think I even said that Pachelbel's canon was classical music's one-hit wonder. Again, total midwit take. Pachelbel's canon is a beautiful piece, even though it's been horribly overplayed, right? Obviously, the answer to this question is start listening to it. But I think the broader question is how to listen to this, which is tough. The way I listened to it in college and high school was I listened to a piece. Classical music is difficult because it doesn't translate into our time very well, in that most people use music as background music. So when I'm working, I try never to listen to anything that has words in it. No podcasts. I haven't always followed this rule, but this is something that just general mental health. Never listen. If you're trying to do something serious and intellectual, never listen to something that has its own individual words, and it will increase your effective IQ by at least 10 points. I'm telling you right now. This is an addict speaking from experience, listening to podcasts in the background. Guilty as charged. Never do that when you're doing anything intellectual. You try for silence, But if you're not doing silence, I have sometimes listened to classical music in the background, and techno music like Aphex Twin or chill beats or whatever. That can work too sometimes. But even then, I'd highly recommend only doing that when you're doing sort of the rote portion of your work. So that can be at least a way of experiencing classical music. The only other way of experiencing the other way is listening to it in the car, right? That's another way of experiencing classical music. You're on a long car ride and you put on classical music. That's a great way of experiencing it. But then if you're talking about the other way, which is listening to it the way that the composer thought you'd be listening to it, which is you walk into a concert hall and, with the exception of like opera and ballet, right, you're just like 100% focused on the music being played, right? 100% focused on what's being communicated by this piece of music. A lot of times, if you're going to do that, you need to sort of familiarize yourself with what you're listening to. I, when I was learning to kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't say I'm a huge classical music fan. Folk music's always been more of my thing, true confession. But when I was first learning to sort of like classical music, and I like classical music now, I couldn't stand Mozart because I felt like, what was the point? Like, all of this Baroque music, and it always has the harpsichord and this little plodding, little, very regular, non-syncopated, not regular necessarily, but these non-syncopated rhythms that have this sort of iambic pentameter that keeps on going forward. This is sort of indicative of a lot of classical stuff, totally indicative of how Mozart works. And I was like, what the hell is it sounds like a bunch of fops dancing around in tights. That's the only thing, until you get to Beethoven, that's the only thing you can imagine when you're listening to this music, right? Obviously, these fops and tights, as I imagined them in my own, these people were pretty much, by our own contemporary standards, total badasses. They were challenging each other to duels. They were inventing science. They were, well, this is a little too early, but, they were fighting wars as cavalry officers. These people were absolute badasses, just see Master and Commander. It's a very accurate depiction of the world they lived in. And, so that impression of this music is sort of, but still it's hard to imagine when you're listening to Mozart, what you're supposed to be thinking about. It's not like Beethoven, we're thinking about like some kind of storm in the Alps or something like that. And then, I started playing classical music, in an orchestra in high school. And then it started making sense to me that this was a very clever sort of musical story. Movements had this sort of structure to them that was like, it was like a clever riddle, kind of. And after that, I started appreciating things like Bach and Mozart a lot more. And then I read Gödel, Escher, Bach, and then it made sense to me on a whole other level. Okay, so here's my advice for enjoying classical music. It's my same advice for appreciating the Bible. The first step to appreciating the Bible is to delete the concept of the Bible from your mind. Never look at the Bible as a book you take off the shelf. Always look at the Bible as its constituent books. Don't think of, I'm going to read the Bible. Think of it as, I'm going to read Ecclesiastes, or I'm going to read Psalm 2. I just flubbed my way through Psalm 2. But even with my own speech impediments and the fact that I don't read things well off the screen, especially when a live stream is going on, I think that probably enough of the poetry of that psalm probably reached some people, right? I mean, why do the heathens rage and the people imagine a vain thing? I mean, the words are just so powerful, they leap off the page. That's one psalm. That's one drop of the Bible's power. But if once you condense the Bible into a book, your own postmodern mind immediately starts for ways to deconstruct and destroy that thing and to stereotype it and to take all of the power that's in that one little line and condense it into some kind of caption that can be filed away in your intellectual system. Classical music is way too big to file away in your system like that. So the way to get into it is to not listen to classical music. The way to get into it is to listen to one piece of music and to feel like you understand it and to make it sort of part of you. Take, for instance, Beethoven. Like, I don't know. The first question to ask yourself, I guess, is how allergic are you to things that you've heard 1,000 times before? Can you take a piece of music that you've heard 1,000 times before and approach it with new eyes? That's the first question. If the answer is no, then I would recommend starting with something like, something from the modern era, like Rachmaninoff. Rachmaninoff is amazing, it's beautiful, and you probably haven't heard it a billion times in commercials and in advertisements and in, high school music recitals and stuff like that, right? So you're safe there. Or, maybe if you really want to challenge yourself, an obscure Mozart or something like that. But then when you go to this piece, don't go to it. Don't go to it as classical music TM. Go to it as this piece. Try to figure out what the author is saying. Trying to figure out what the author is doing. So let's say that you. I'm going to presume, for the sake of argument, you have a high tolerance for music that you've heard a lot. So let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's just go to the best, like the music that is stereotypically said as the best. Bach and Beethoven, right? I'm going to exclude Mozart because I feel he's deceptively inaccessible. I really wish Catholic Wench were. Maybe we should do a stream with Catholic Wench. She has lots of things to say about this. So what are the best of Beethoven and Bach? The Ninth Symphony for Beethoven that's stereotypical answer for Beethoven, right? And then in Bach, it's the Goldberg variations and the Mass in B. I think, again, this is like hipster credentials ruined, because those are the most stereotypical great classical pieces of music you've ever heard. Everyone will tell you those are the best, right? Okay, and Hannibal Lecter has ruined the Goldberg variations forever, just like Buffalo Bill ruined Goodbye Horses. And I love both of those pieces of music, so fuck Silence of the Lambs with a big, but the Goldberg variations, I guess going in reverse order. Just listen to that piece of music, and that music doesn't have a piece of story. That music doesn't have a story to it. It just is. The Goldberg variations was one of the pieces of music that they put in the Voyager time capsule that's currently exiting our galaxy, and it was well selected for that reason. Because if there is a piece of music that lives in isolation and that communicates in and of itself just subtle beauty for beauty's sake, I say the Goldberg variations is very much up there. And I fully respect Glenn Gould. I just don't think you should start with Glenn Gould's version of that. Take something that's more standard, right? Glenn Gould is Glenn Gould, not the Goldberg variations, right? Sorry, Glenn Gould was a famous Canadian pianist. My inner 8th grader cannot say pianist without Beavis and Butthead playing in my mind. But I think that's just like pure abstract classical music. That's classical music. Just try to meditate on Goldberg variations. Mass in B, however, that's still Bach, but that's different. Mass in B this is a mass. So you are Christendom, right? Christendom is organized around Christianity. And Christianity is organized around this ceremony for you non-Christians out there, or for you hopelessly lost Protestants who are not either Episcopalian or Lutheran. Christianity is organized around the ceremony called the Mass, in which Christians celebrate the Gospels and the Last Supper of Jesus Christ in the form of the Eucharist. This Mass is contained within a box called the liturgy, a holy set of ceremonies and songs that people compose music for. Now, at the height of civilization, or I believe one of the heights of civilization, the height of Christian belief, or one of the heights, just after the religious wars, the greatest genius of music constructed the Mass and Bay to be the container for the ceremony that defines our civilization. Believe in it or not, this is that box. Approach it as such. This is how the people who created our civilization celebrated holiness in its ordinary form. Not holiness you'd find on a mountaintop, not holiness that you'd find in the midst of battle, but this was their grand version of holiness in its ordinary form that you could encounter every Sunday if you were a churchman in good standing with the Lutheran Church. The Catholics use it too, but same ceremony. I don't know. Can you listen to Mass and B and not get excited about it in that context? Okay, let's do the last one, the Ninth Symphony. Okay, this again is holiness now, as God on the mountaintop, because it's Beethoven we're talking about here, right? Beethoven is the storm cloud German, and he's a German too, right? But he's not a German like Bach was a German. He's a German who's like this radical individual on the cusp of the 19th century, the century of the heroic individual. He even had a symphony called Eroica, which is the Symphony of Heroism, maybe about about not Napoleon, the hero of the new century, right? And but this Ninth Symphony, this is Beethoven's crowning achievement. This is not only the symphony about a hero like Eroica, but this is the symphony about the cycle, the life force of humanity, battling against itself. It's man's struggle against himself in one symphony. And that's the story it's telling you. And because this is Beethoven and not Bach, you have to deal with that story as it exists. And you get to deal with it. And of course, we've heard this, like, again, just like Hannibal Lecter ruined the Goldberg variations, Alex from A Clockwork Orange ruined Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And maybe you can't hear this without seeing Clockwork Orange, right? But I can, right? I can think about what this symphony meant. And this is the last symphony of the greatest classical music composer of all time, arguably. And it's this amazing piece of music. It's set to words in the last act by Schiller, which was one of the greatest German poets. Now, of course, this is not subtle. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is about as subtle as a bazooka is. It's the Warhammer 40K of classical music. There's nothing subtle about this. You have to turn off your modern brain that's cynical and that's going to try to take things and deconstruct things. Congratulations, you can deconstruct the Ninth Symphony. It is a product of its age. No shit. But what a grand age that must have been to produce this thing. So if you're modern and your brain can't help but deconstruct things, and your brain can't help but hear cliches everywhere, I would stick to Baroque music, and I would stick to minimalism. Sorry. Very long answer too. Am I getting feedback from the chat here? Okay. I'm sorry about all these digressions. I really do enjoy them. I actually enjoy the digressions more than the prepared speech. I'm always afraid that I'm going to come off as pretentious, but here I can just get excited about classical music. I mean, that's awesome, right? Finally a stream. Hunger for $3 says, finally a stream where we don't have to stay up till 12:30 a.m. Congrats on the move. Well, thank you very much, Hunger. And I hope to be communicating with you more in the future. Won't say any more about that, but thanks for the contribution. Whenever I get the entropy donation, I will post the receipt on my Telegram. So, if you're really concerned that I'm not embezzling the money, then I'll do that. Although I think most people donate just to have their questions answered. I don't think they really care if I would consume the money. I don't think we'll see. Is that the end of the super chats? I'm going to refresh my entropy page because I thought I saw a few more. Well, if I'm out of super chats, at reply me right now. If not, I will assume that I'm out of entropy chats, and I will just add the out replies. I'm out of water. So I'll end this stream at 12 o'clock, just so it's a nice round number. And if I miss a super chat, please at reply me and tell me that I missed a super chat. I hate doing that. I'm going to skim the entropy donations one more time. Okay, I think I got all of them. I don't know. Maybe I just can't use the entropy questions. It doesn't seem to be fair. It's not a true distance unless I literally try to drink from the fire hose and answer at replies in the literal live chat. So just at reply me. Okay, so distributors, I have some obscure classic-esque music that you'd like. Search for Escaflowne or Eyes or Glory or Angel. If I search for Escaflowne in my search bar, I'm going to get visions of Escaflowne, the anime that I watched in literally, the day of 9/11. I remember watching Escaflowne because that was back in my anime phase. That was literally what I was doing 20 years ago, was watching Visions of Escaflowne, which is a hopelessly romantic anime from the 1990s, which I'm sure does not maintain itself because romanticism never does. Oh, Biz Throwaway says, I posted one. A super chat? I'm sorry, I'm just not seeing this. Biz Runaway. Okay, this is the last time I check these things. I'm really sorry. Okay, I'm not saying it. Okay, I'll just drink from keep on drinking from the fire hose. Oh, and if you're at replying me, you can't say answer my previous question. You have to repeat your question because I'm not scrolling up through a fire hose chat, right? Okay, someone's saying I missed one from Zero Kev. Okay, I got the one about Morgenthau being the villain. I got the one from NRX being threatened by the cathedral. I got the one from witchcraft. Dude, I got all of these, Catman. Okay, I missed one from Catman. Okay, I'm sorry, guys, for people who... I really want to make sure I get all of these things. Zero Kev. Cringewalker. Terrence Malick. Arturo. Are people trolling me? People must be trolling me. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. Okay, if I miss this, I'll check my entropy donations later, and I'll answer it on a future stream. Catman, if you want to repeat your question here, I will answer it. If not, I'm going to assume that you're trolling me. Okay, someone's saying I assume that the current debacle in the Middle East is not due to incompetence, but due to treachery. Yeah, but this is one of those. I floated that idea too. I think it's very likely that what we're seeing is Biden did something to piss off the military establishment, and they reasserted their dominance by purposely bungling the withdrawal from Afghanistan to hurt the Biden administration. And yeah, I that's a high probability. But this is like we're never going to know the answer to this question. If the answer to that question exists in documents, those documents are classified, and short of another, well, with Julian Assange in jail, and sort of a more ethical Chelsea slash Bradley Manning, we're probably not going to know about that anytime in the future. We have to adapt to the fact that certain information is out of our reach. Endeavor did a video on this about, and this is the internal challenge. And I assume that Endeavor came to the same conclusion that I did about this question, about that the problem we're dealing with right now is that we don't trust the government, but we don't have a better source of information. So just because the government's lying to us doesn't mean that everything the government says is a lie, which means that we have to sort of look at the evidence as it is in pure data form and draw our own conclusions. For instance, I have drawn the conclusion that COVID isn't fake. Obviously, COVID isn't fake because we have excess deaths, right? I can see from the pure data that more people are dying in 2020 than died in 2019. There's no other better explanation for why this is occurring. So I assume that these excess deaths must be COVID. But I can't, so that's an ad hoc data analysis where I can independently verify that COVID actually kills people. Now, I don't know how many people it kills. It looks like, it largely targets a very specific demographic of older people. And I can see that in the numbers too. But as to the finer points about relative risk from vaccinations, who also have only tail end risks, that is such a sophisticated statistical question that I couldn't possibly know the answer to that question without doing extensive research by myself. And I don't trust a lot of these institutions to deliver answers to questions that are highly sophisticated and involve a certain amount of repeatability. So I don't think that we're getting honest answers from them. Would you consider playing some of the modern AAA garbage with an excuse that you're actually going to make a video on it? Yeah, I would play a AAA video game if I was going to make a video on it. But I am not short of video ideas. I'm short of video making time, and I'm short on understanding an audience to make a video too. Someone super chatted me, so I'll answer that later. Okay, where is this? Is this? I'm actually really getting creeped out. Am I missing super chats? Okay, I'm gonna reload my entropy, guys. Oh, here we go. Here's more super chats. Hold on, there's a whole... Oh, shit. Okay, no wonder. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. I actually did miss super chats. So, okay, guys, I apologize. I can't drink from the fire hose today. I'm going to have to spend all the remaining time answering these super chats. So I'm assuming that it goes from the bottom. So let's just answer the remaining super chats, and hopefully that'll be a wrap because I've been going on for a while now. But the point is about Endeavor's video, and I haven't watched it, but I assume the conclusion is that we're in deep shit because of the fact that we can't get independent fact verification that we trust. Okay, great. So the Traditionalist, again, for $5, I'll be a little bit more brisk answering these questions. I've been watching some of your old videos and I want to ask, given how near ubiquitous progressive messaging is, do you think that reality grill pill way to bring people to the right still holds up? It does, because we are not interested in we're not interested in profilicity addicted, dopamine addicted people in parasocial relationships with online phenomenon. We're interested in people who are interested in the world. I know this is really difficult because you interact with me through a social media profile, but all I can do is look into your eyes, look into the eyes of my camera and just tell you as earnestly as I can, I am not interested in a parasocial relationship. I'm interested in living in this world with real friendships. Maybe if I meet you in person, we can be friends. Maybe if we're online in a book group, we can be friends, and we're all invested in the world. But I'm totally uninterested in cultivating some kind of number on social media. I'm not collecting super chats in a way that benefits me. I'm saying fuck my subscriber count. As far I care that people watch my videos, right? I care because I want to have an audience for them. I wouldn't make videos if people didn't watch them. So I'm not going to lie to you and say that views don't matter to me. But some kind of notoriety through social media networks is meaningless to me. The grill pill is for people. The grill pill is a way to red people. The grill pill is a way to red pill people who are invested in this world and in real friendships. It's not a way to red pill people who are stuck in la la land trying to figure out how they can maximize their social media profile. It's not worth it to get those people. So I still maintain, and maybe I'll change my opinion, that the grill pill is the red pill, with the caveat that you have to be in some kind of real world scenario for that actually to apply. If you have kids, the grill pill is a way to red pill people about the realities of raising children in this world. If you even play physical board games, or if you have a group of people who read books together, which is not happening in COVID, but hey, maybe if you're a really thick community, that's happening. One thing that I really would love, and this is off topic, but I would really love to have a place where I could play folk music again that wasn't filled with progressives. And I think that might be a way to bring red pill people as well. Okay, finally, I can get to Biz Throwaway. I wonder why. Great, I refresh it and now it's no longer selecting this. Okay, well, I'm going to have to read these without having the horrible display on my OBS. Biz Throwaway for USA $5. I've been watching you for 5 years now, and you are one of the people who helped me push towards Christianity and traditionalism. Well, thank you very much. That's very flattering. Today I went to my first mass, and I literally cried because it was so beautiful. Thank you so much, man. Well, thank you so much, Biz Throwaway. I really appreciate those encouraging messages. I wish I could say that all masses I have been to in the last few years have been beautiful. Actually, very few of them have been, to be quite honest. I will say that, today in Mass, it's been one of the few homilies that I've walked away from and been and said to myself, well, I really learned something. I'm looking at that Bible passage in a completely new way, and life, it's sort of pushed me in a direction that I've been thinking about for a while. I think modern day priests have a very, very hard time understanding their audience. And so crafting good homilies must be a complete minefield. I can't imagine how hard that is. Half your audience is boomers. Half of your audience is or probably 10% of your audience is more traddy Catholic Zoomers and millennials. And then 20% of your audience are immigrants or people or ethnic Catholics, as I call them. They're just there for their obligation because that's how their parents do things. Catman for odd $10. Please pray, Australian $10. Dollary dues, as we call them. Please pray for Australia. We have become a totalitarian hellhole. We no longer have basic human rights. Let our country be a harsh lesson. Never be apathetic towards your government's agenda or politics. This is the last message I'm making online. Wish everyone here the best. God bless. Well, thank God I didn't miss this one. I will keep you in my prayers, Catman, and Australia, and my online friend, the Franklin from Australia, who I haven't listened to his stream. I promoted it before I listened to it. I heard my name come up in connection to it, so I just thanked him for that. but my video watching time has contracted slightly. So, especially since I'm trying to be more present, it's contracted significantly. So I will try to watch that. But I will pray for Australia and everyone there. I'll pray right now. I had to keep on talking, so I can't really give a focused prayer. Our prayers are with you. But I will say, Australia, let's combine this with the next question. You're trying to grill pill boomers, use Australia. You're trying to talk about something in social media and you're not an Australian country, let's talk about Australia. Australia, their plight has to be something that we make our banner. How can the left not answer for this? How can normies not answer for this? What is happening there? How does this at all align with our understanding of ourselves in the modern world? How can boomers think that everything is all right if this is what's going on? Prayers, but here there is also an action. We can center this in our own conversations when we're talking to people. If you're grill pilling somebody and COVID comes up, Australia should come up and we should ask them if this is our future. Because if this is our future, it's a grim future. And there's no sign of it ending. Ryan R. C. Lewis for $3 USA. Spent a whole month on the road with my fiance. We watched a lot of your videos while on the road, working on making a future life cozy. God bless. Oh yeah, that's the other thing too. Among the many myriad pieces of blog media I promoted on this channel, More Goth was right up front with one of the best videos of the year, The Broken Violin. But, and this wasn't a great video of his, but it was notable in kind of what he was trying to do rather than how he did it. I thought it was kind of like, I mean, I'm not going to criticize the guy, but he made this video about the landscape and about fall coming to the landscape. He captured my sentiments exactly about what I'm experiencing and thinking walking through the eastern United States at this time. And it's not really a place that I have deep connections to personally, but being present and being landed, for some reason fall brings this out. It seems to bring out this idea that we're grounded and situated inside an actual earth that's changing. That has to be part of our aesthetic. And Morgoth, in making these videos about land, can you make social media that depicts groundedness and then makes that a central part? Or is the medium just so corrupted that you can't do that anymore? I don't know. Oh no. Oh, someone super chatted me. Catman's pseudo-analysis for $10. Please pray for Australia. Well, thank you very much, pseudo-analyst, for saying that. Okay, I gotta reset this again to make sure I'm not missing any additional ones. Okay, so all this take pseudo-analysts your tweet as being a prayer for Australia, which is definitely needed. You know, it's sort of funny. Morgoth comes from sort of the more nationalist ethnic scene, and I come from more of the American religious scene. And our issue is always sort of race. You know, that was always the issue that divided us. The issue that should unite us is coziness and posterity. Posterity communicates everything that I think that's the word that clarifies everything to me that race seems to obscure. The genetic lineage is absolutely part of our tradition. But the purity is something that, for me at least, is absolutely not an issue. as long as our genetic lineage goes down and we have an understanding of that and a consciousness of that in our culture, I'm sure there's going to be some mixing here and there and all that stuff. You know, does that make race not important? Well, see, the race dimension adds all of these questions about purity and obsession and this whole religion of race that existed in the 20th century that I find, frankly, quite disgusting and stupid. And so that kind of divided us. What we should be focusing on is posterity, on lineage, and having a groundedness and connection to both the land and our ancestors. I don't think that you can completely discount genetics from that equation. That does not mean you need to be a race obsessed, person as is the stereotype, right? One last super chat, Felix Fairmont for $3. Keep up the good work, Dave. Thank you very much. And with that, I am at time, so I'm just going to check this. I'm actually getting kind of really tired because I've been doing this for a while. I will say to everyone here, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate everyone who continues to watch my channel. I hope that I can continue to produce content that's good for you guys. But if for whatever reason you decide to log off, you're sick of social media, you don't think I'm producing good content anymore, or on the off chance that I get banned, which is not insignificant, I just want to say, be opened, as Jesus in the parable. Be open to holiness. Be open to the world we live in. I know it's ugly. I know the prospects for the future are grim. Just open your eyes and see what's coming at you right now. Don't hide behind a social media screen. Use social media if you need to the extent that you can get something from it. Use it like a phone in the Amish person's barn. It's a tool. Use it. Online dating is a tool. Use it. Understand what you're doing. Keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes open. That's the number one thing I think we can take from Jesus, from ancient wisdom, and from how we're going to interact with this world. I don't know exactly what's coming down the pipe, but I know how to be aware of what's going on. We are in a dying civilization. There are opportunities. We are in a dying civilization. There is holiness. I've never been more certain that there's opportunities and opportunities for holiness that abound, and we're just blind to them and we're not seeing them, and we're not giving them proper weight because they're not part of our social media profile. God is not going to be something that has good profilicity. And maybe there's a way to make profilicity more amenable to God. I'm not ruling that out. But we should start with our eyes open to reality, and then figure out how to make that part of our profile and not vice versa. So with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next time.